My son lay in a hospital bed with his legs suspended in a sling and his neck wrapped in a thick brace while I stood there ready to sell my own house to pay for his recovery. I was ready to liquidate my retirement fund and give him everything I had left in this world until the paralyzed woman in the bed next to him grabbed my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, like iron hidden under fragile skin. Her eyes were wide with a terror so raw it made my stomach turn as she looked past me at my weeping daughter-in-law. She pulled me down until my ear was inches from her dry, cracked lips and whispered 5 words that froze the blood in my veins. Run from him right now. Before I tell you how a father's love turned into a fight for survival against the people I trusted most, tell me in the comments if you have ever discovered a venomous snake living in your own home. Hit like and subscribe to see justice served cold, because this story is about to prove that blood is not always thicker than water. My name is Curtis, and for 40 years I worked as a foreman at a logistics warehouse in Chicago. I know how to spot a crack in a foundation before the building collapses, and I know when inventory counts do not add up. Standing in that sterile emergency room surrounded by the smell of bleach and rubbing alcohol, my internal alarm bells were ringing so loud they drowned out the steady beep of the heart monitor. 2 police officers stood by the door with their notebooks open, scribbling down the statement my son Terrence was giving them between groans of pain. Terrence is 32 years old, but lying there in that hospital gown, he looked like a scared child. He told the officers that a stray dog had run out into the middle of the intersection and he swerved to avoid it. He said the brakes locked up and the car spun out, hitting a utility pole. The young officer nodded sympathetically and closed his notebook, but I remained silent, standing in the corner with my arms crossed over my chest. I have driven trucks for decades and I know physics. I looked at the bruises on Terrence's chest. They were diagonal, running from his left shoulder to his right hip, which meant he was wearing his seatbelt. But if he hit a pole head-on at 40 miles per hour like he claimed, the airbag burns should have been on his face and forearms. There were no burns. His face was clean aside from a small cut on his lip that looked more like he had bitten it than an impact wound. I stepped forward and cleared my throat. "Officer," I asked, "was the airbag deployed when you arrived at the scene?" The officer looked at me and then flipped back a page in his notebook. He frowned for a second. "No, sir, actually it was not. It seems the sensor failed to trigger, which is fortunate for your son given the angle of impact." I looked at Terrence. He refused to meet my eyes. He stared fixedly at the ceiling tile above his head and let out a long, dramatic moan, clutching his leg. I knew that car. It was a 10-year-old sedan I had bought him when he landed his first sales job. It was old, but I maintained it myself. I checked the sensors last month. I checked the brake pads. I kept that car running better than vehicles half its age because I knew my son was reckless. For the airbags not to deploy on a frontal collision meant the impact was not frontal, or the speed was much lower than he was claiming. Something was not adding up. The math of the accident was wrong. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to ask why there were no skid marks mentioned in the report if he slammed on the brakes to avoid a dog. But before I could open my mouth, the double doors of the emergency room flew open with a bang that made the officers jump. The sound of high heels clicking rapidly against the linoleum floor announced her arrival before she even came into view. Courtney, my daughter-in-law. She rushed into the room wearing a beige trench coat that looked like it cost more than my monthly pension check. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and despite the late hour, her makeup was flawless. Mascara framed her blue eyes, which were already swimming with tears that seemed to appear on command. She did not look at the police. She did not look at the doctors. She did not even look at her husband moaning on the bed. She looked straight at me. Her eyes narrowed and the tears instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare that I had seen too many times over the last 5 years. "This is your fault," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Her voice was shrill enough to make the nurses at the station outside look up. "This is all your fault, Curtis. If you had just let him take the truck, he would be safe right now. You and your selfish pride. You care more about that stupid Ford than you do about your own son's life." I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I kept my face impassive. It is a discipline I learned managing a crew of 50 men. You never let them see you sweat. Courtney was talking about my Ford F-150. It was a brand new model, charcoal gray with a heavy-duty suspension. It was the one thing I had treated myself to after I retired. A reward for 4 decades of waking up at 4 in the morning. Terrence had asked to borrow it 3 days ago. He said he needed to move some furniture for a client. I said no. I said no because the last time he borrowed my vehicle, he returned it with a cracked bumper and the cabin smelling like stale beer. I told him he could use his own car. Now Courtney was weaponizing that decision, using it to paint me as a villain in front of the police and the medical staff. I lowered my voice, trying to de-escalate the situation. Courtney, listen to me. The car is not the issue right now. The issue is that the accident report does not match the physical evidence. I think we need to understand what really happened. She cut me off with a scoff that sounded like a whip crack. "Oh, listen to him," she said, turning to the police officer and flashing a look of desperate vulnerability. "Listen to him, officer. My father-in-law thinks he is a detective. He has always been like this. Paranoid, controlling. He hates that Terrence is trying to make a life for us. He would rather see his son in a wheelchair than admit he was wrong to deny him a safe vehicle. Look at my husband. Look at him suffering. And his own father stands there talking about physics and evidence." I looked at Terrence, expecting him to defend me. I expected him to tell his wife to stop being disrespectful, to tell her that I had paid his rent 3 times this year alone, that I had co-signed the loan for her nursing school tuition. But Terrence just turned his head away and let out a whimper. "Courtney, my leg hurts so bad," he whined. "Make him stop. He is making my head pound." Courtney rushed to his side, grabbing his hand and stroking his forehead. "I am here, baby," she cooed. "I am here. I won't let him bully you anymore." She turned back to me and her face was like a stone mask. "You need to leave Curtis. You are upsetting him. His blood pressure is rising. We need privacy to discuss his medical care." I stood my ground for a moment. "I am his father," I said, my voice steady but heavy with hurt. "I have a right to be here." "No, you do not," she snapped. "I am his wife. I am his next of kin, and I am asking you to leave before I call security. Do not make a scene, Curtis. People are watching. You know how it looks." She knew exactly what buttons to push. She knew that as a black man of my generation, I had spent my entire life trying to avoid being labeled as aggressive or difficult in public spaces, especially when dealing with authority figures. The police officer shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting near his belt. He did not know the history. He did not know the money I had poured into their bottomless pit of a lifestyle. He only saw a grieving wife and an older man who was refusing to leave. "Sir," the officer said gently but firmly, "maybe it is best if you step out to the waiting room. Give them some space." I looked at my son one last time. He still refused to look at me. He was hiding behind his wife's performance. I felt a crack in my heart, a fissure that had been forming for years, finally splitting open. "Fine," I said. "I will be outside if the doctors need me." I turned to walk away, my heavy work boots thumping softly on the floor. As I reached the curtain that separated Terrence's area from the next bed, I paused. I felt a gaze on me. Heavy, intense. I turned my head slightly. In the next bed lay an elderly black woman. The chart at the foot of her bed read Etta May. She looked to be about my age, maybe a little older. Her body was frail, wasted away by some long-term illness, and she was hooked up to an oxygen machine that hissed rhythmically. But her eyes were alive. They were not looking at me. They were fixed on Courtney. Etta May's eyes were wide, so wide the whites showed all around the irises. Her mouth was slightly open, and her hands were gripping the bedsheets so tightly her knuckles were gray. It was not a look of curiosity. It was a look of recognition. An absolute, unadulterated terror. She looked like she was seeing a ghost or a demon rise from the pits of hell. She watched Courtney fuss over Terrence, and I saw a tremor run through the old woman's body, shaking the tubes connected to her arm. Then her eyes snapped to mine. For a second, the air in the room seemed to vanish. We locked eyes, two strangers in a sea of medical chaos. She shook her head at me, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Left, then right. "No, do not go." Or maybe do not trust. I did not know what it meant. The nurse stepped in and pulled the curtain shut, snapping the plastic rings along the metal track, severing the connection. I was left standing in the hallway, staring at the beige pattern of the curtain, listening to Courtney's voice drop from a hysterical shriek to a low, murmuring whisper. I could not hear the words, but the tone was not comforting. It sounded calculating. It sounded like a plan being hatched. I walked to the vending machine at the end of the hall and bought a black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. I sat down on the plastic chair and stared at the double doors. My son had broken his leg. My daughter-in-law had kicked me out. And a paralyzed stranger had looked at my family with the kind of fear usually reserved for death row. I took a sip of the bitter coffee and felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was not an accident. I did not know what it was yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The physics were wrong, and when the physics are wrong, it means someone tampered with the equation. I decided then and there I was not going to leave. I would sit in this chair all night if I had to. I needed to see those eyes again. I needed to know what Etta May saw that I was missing. Over the next 3 days, the hospital room became a theater of the absurd, and my daughter-in-law was the star actress. Courtney only appeared during visiting hours when the lighting was best. She would breeze in smelling of vanilla perfume and expensive coffee, holding a Bible she never opened. She would position herself by Terrence's bedside and gently rest her hand on his cast, just long enough to snap a photo with her phone. Then she would spend the next 20 minutes sitting in the corner chair, ignoring her husband completely while she edited the picture and crafted the perfect caption. I watched her fingers fly across the screen. Hashtag devoted wife. Hashtag praying for a miracle. Hashtag survivor. Once the upload was complete and the likes started rolling in, she would suddenly remember she had urgent errands to run. She never emptied his bedpan. She never helped him sip water when his throat was dry. She never adjusted his pillows. I did all of that. I was the one wiping the sweat from my 32-year-old son's forehead, while his wife sat 3 feet away accepting digital sympathy from strangers. It was during these long hours of silence that I began to notice the woman in the next bed. Etta May had no visitors, no flowers, no cards, just the rhythmic hissing of her oxygen tank and the sterile white walls. The hospital staff did the bare minimum for her. They changed her IV and checked her vitals, but they did not speak to her. They treated her like a piece of furniture that just happened to be breathing. On the second day, I brought in a thermos of homemade corn chowder because the hospital cafeteria food tasted like wet cardboard. I poured a bowl for myself, and then I looked at Etta. She was staring at the steam rising from my cup. Her eyes were hungry, not just for food, but for acknowledgement. I poured a second cup and walked over to her side of the curtain. I asked her if she was allowed to eat solids. She blinked once for yes. I spent the next hour slowly feeding her spoon by spoon. She could not speak much due to the tube in her nose, but her eyes followed me everywhere. There was a desperate intelligence in them. When Courtney was in the room, Etta would close her eyes and feign sleep, but I noticed her breathing would change. It became shallow and rapid. She was terrified of my daughter-in-law. At the time, I thought it maybe she was just intimidated by Courtney's loud voice and aggressive perfume. I did not realize she was playing dead to survive. On the afternoon of the third day, Terrence was finally lucid enough to have a conversation. The morphine drip had been lowered, and the reality of his situation was setting in. I was sitting by the window reading an old newspaper when he called my name. His voice was raspy. "Dad," he said. "Look at me." I put down the paper and walked over. "I am looking at you, son. You are alive. That is what matters." He shook his head, wincing as the movement pulled at his neck brace. "No. Dad, look at my face. I have a scar on my lip. My nose is crooked. I look like a monster." "You look like a man who survived a car crash," I said flatly. "Scars heal, Terrence." He licked his dry lips, and I saw the old familiar glint in his eyes, the glint that always appeared right before he asked for money. "The doctor said I need reconstructive surgery," he said. "Not just for the nose. For the leg, too. If I want to walk without a limp, I need the best orthopedic surgeon in the state, Dr. Hansen. He is private practice only. He does not take basic insurance." I felt the heavy stone of disappointment settle in my gut. Here we go. He was not worried about being alive. He was worried about his vanity and his comfort. "And who says you have basic insurance?" I asked. "You have the premium policy from your sales job. I saw the paperwork when you started." Terrence looked away. He picked at a loose thread on his blanket. "That policy lapsed, Dad. I missed a few payments. Things have been tight. The commission checks were late." I knew he was lying. I knew because I still had friends at the logistics company where he worked. I knew his checks were on time. I stood up and walked to the foot of the bed, gripping the plastic rail until my knuckles turned white. "Do not lie to me, Terrence. Not here. Not while you are lying in a hospital bed I am paying for. You did not miss the payments because things were tight. You missed them because you cashed out your paycheck at the Riverboat Casino 3 months in a row." His head snapped back toward me, his eyes wide with shock. "How did you know that?" "I know everything, Terrence," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I know about the debt. I know why you are renting that shoebox apartment, and now you want me to pay for a private surgeon. Where do you think that money is coming from?" He swallowed hard, but he did not back down. He played his trump card. The house on Elm Street. It is too big for you anyway, Dad. You are one man living in 4 bedrooms. Courtney says the market is peaking right now. If you sell it, we can pay for the surgery. We can get a nice duplex. You can live in the guest suite. We can take care of you. The audacity took my breath away. He was asking me to sell the home where I had raised him, the home where his mother had died, the home I had paid off with 40 years of sweat and backbreaking labor, and he wanted to trade it for a guest suite and a nose job. The house is not for sale, I said. My voice was final. It was the voice I used when I fired a man for stealing from the warehouse. You drove a car with expired insurance. You rolled the dice, and you lost. I will cover your hospital bills, Terrence, because you are my son, but you are going to the rehab center the state approves, and you are going to walk with a limp if that is what it takes to learn responsibility. Terrence's face twisted into a mask of ugly rage. You are a selfish old man, he hissed. Mom would never have done this to me. She loved me. I turned my back on him before I said something I couldn't take back. Your mother would be ashamed, I said softly. That night was the longest of my life. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Courtney arrived late, around 9 o'clock. She did not greet me. She went straight to Terrence. They whispered together for a long time. I pretended to be asleep in the uncomfortable vinyl chair, my hat pulled down over my eyes. But I was listening. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough to make my skin crawl. I heard the words power of attorney. I heard the words mental competency. And I heard Courtney say quite clearly, Plan B. Plan B. What was Plan B? Around midnight, I got up to use the restroom. My joints were stiff and my heart was heavy. When I came back, the room was dark, lit only by the green glow of the heart monitors. Courtney had left. Terrence was snoring heavily under the influence of a sleeping pill. I walked past Etta Mae's bed to get to my chair. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the darkness. It happened so fast I almost shouted. Etta Mae's hand clamped onto my wrist with a strength that defied her frail appearance. Her nails dug into my skin, scratching me. I looked down. Her eyes were wide open, staring at me with that same intensity I had seen the first night. But this time, there was no fear. There was only urgency. She pulled on my arm, dragging me down. I hesitated. I looked at the door to make sure the nurses weren't watching. Then I lowered my head until my ear was hovering right above her mouth. Her breath smelled of the corn chowder I had fed her earlier. Listen to me, she whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Listen to me, Curtis. I am listening, Etta, I whispered back. She swallowed hard, gathering the strength for what she had to say. Her eyes darted to my sleeping son, then back to me. It is not about the money, she wheezed. They are not just waiting for you to die. They are going to help you along. I pulled back, slightly shocked by the accusation. Etta, you don't know what you are saying. They are greedy, yes, but they are family. She yanked me back down. Her grip was painful now. No, she hissed. I heard them. Heard. I speak Spanish, Curtis. Your daughter-in-law thought I was just a vegetable. She was on the phone before you came back. She was talking to a doctor. Not a doctor here, a doctor on the street. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are you telling me? She looked deep into my soul. That boy didn't crash because of a dog. He crashed because he was scared. He was trying to back out of something, but she wouldn't let him. And now you are the problem. She released my wrist and her hand fell back onto the sheets, trembling. Run, she whispered one last time. Run from him now. It wasn't an accident. It was a rehearsal. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly. I looked at the red marks her fingernails had left on my wrist. I looked at my son, sleeping peacefully with a smile on his face. A rehearsal. The word echoed in the silent room. A rehearsal for what? I felt a cold chill settle over me that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. I sat down in my chair and watched the rise and fall of my son's chest. I did not sleep that night. I sat there and I waited for the sun to rise, wondering if I was sharing a room with my own assassin. The silence of my home, which I had cultivated like a rare garden for 40 years, was shattered the moment Courtney walked through the door. She did not knock. She did not wait to be invited. She simply unlocked the front door with the spare key I had foolishly given Terrence years ago and kicked it open. Behind her, 2 burly movers were hauling a rented hospital bed that looked like a mechanical spider. It was barely 10 in the morning, but my living room was instantly transformed from a sanctuary of peace into a chaotic command center for my son's recovery. I stood in the hallway holding my coffee mug, watching as they shoved my favorite leather armchair against the wall to make room for the bed. That armchair was where I sat every morning to read the paper. It was molded to the shape of my back. Now it was just an obstacle in Courtney's path. She was barking orders like a general on a battlefield, pointing at corners of the room and snapping her fingers. "Put the IV stand there," she shouted, "and move that rug. It is a tripping hazard. If Terrence trips, I will sue this moving company into bankruptcy." She turned to me and her eyes swept over my home with a look of undisguised disdain. "Curtis, do not just stand there," she said. "Go clear out the guest bathroom. We need space for his medical supplies. And open a window. It smells like old man in here." I wanted to tell her that the house smelled of lemon polish and cedar wood the same way it had since my wife passed away. I wanted to tell her that she had no right to rearrange my furniture. But then I looked at Terrence. He was being carried in on a stretcher, his leg elevated, his face twisted in a mask of agony. He let out a low moan when the movers set him down on the rented bed. "Dad," he gasped. "Please, just do what she says. I can't take the pain." So I swallowed my pride. I put down my coffee mug and went to the bathroom, clearing off the shelf where I kept my shaving kit. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they were here because their apartment had plumbing issues, as Courtney claimed. I did not know yet that they had been evicted 3 days ago. I did not know that my home was not a refuge for them, but a target. I moved through my house like a ghost obeying orders in the kingdom I had built with my own hands. By noon, the living room was unrecognizable. There were boxes of gauze bottles of saline and monitors that beeped incessantly. Courtney had set up a small desk in the corner for herself where she sat with her laptop, supposedly managing his care but mostly shopping online. My house did not feel like mine anymore. It felt like a staging ground for an occupation. The real blow came 2 hours later. I was in the kitchen making soup when I heard a crash from the living room, followed by the sound of things being tossed into a garbage bag. It was a heavy thudding sound, distinct and rhythmic. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked out. What I saw stopped my heart in my chest. Courtney was standing by the built-in oak shelves next to the fireplace. These shelves held my most prized possession, my vinyl collection. 300 records collected over 5 decades. First pressings of Miles Davis, rare recordings of John Coltrane, and most importantly, the albums my wife and I had danced to on our wedding night. Courtney was pulling them off the shelf by the handful and dropping them into a black, heavy-duty trash bag. "Stop," I shouted. My voice was loud enough to make Terrence jump on his bed. "What are you doing?" Courtney did not even flinch. She just looked at me with that bored, irritated expression she reserved for service workers and me. "We need this shelf for the television," she said calmly, dropping a pristine copy of Kind of Blue into the bag. "Terrence needs entertainment while he recovers. He can't stare at the wall all day, and these dusty old things are just taking up space. They are a fire hazard, Curtis. Look at the dust." I rushed forward and grabbed her wrist. The plastic bag crinkled loudly. "These are not dusty old things," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "That record you just dropped. My wife gave me that for our 10th anniversary. You take them out of that bag. Now." Courtney yanked her arm away. She looked at Terrence. "Baby, tell him. Tell him the dust is bad for your allergies." Terrence looked at me. His eyes were groggy, but there was no sympathy in them. "Dad, honestly," he said, "who listens to that stuff anymore? It is just clutter. Courtney is trying to keep the environment sterile. Just let her put them in the garage or something." It was not the garage she was aiming for. I saw the way she looked at them. She saw trash. She saw garbage. She saw a barrier between her and the space she wanted to control. I realized then that this was not about space. It was about erasure. She was erasing me from my own home. She was removing the symbols of my history to make room for her future. I knelt down and pulled the bag from her hands. I did not scream. I did not hit her. I simply picked up the bag and walked it to my bedroom. I placed the records gently on my bed, smoothing out the covers. My hands were shaking. I locked my bedroom door and put the key in my pocket. When I came back out, Courtney was already mounting a flat-screen TV on the empty shelf, drilling holes into the oak wood I had polished every Sunday for 20 years. The sound of the drill screaming into the wood felt like it was boring into my own skull. I went back to the kitchen and stared at the soup boiling on the stove. The steam rose up, hot and blinding. I realized Edame was right. This was an invasion, and the casualties were already piling up. Later that evening, the house finally fell quiet. Courtney had gone out to pick up dinner, claiming she needed a break from the stress of caretaking. I was left alone with Terrence. He had been moaning for the last hour, complaining that his pain was at a 10 out of 10. He begged me for water. He begged me to fluff his pillows. He demanded I turn the air conditioning down, then up, then down again. I was exhausted. My legs ached from running up and down the stairs. "Dad," he called out, his voice weak and strained. "The pain, it is coming back. I need my meds. The doctor said every 4 hours. Please." I looked at the clock. It had only been 3 hours, but seeing my son in agony broke through my suspicion. I went to the kitchen and retrieved the orange pill bottle. I poured a glass of water. I walked back toward the living room, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I intended to go straight to him, but I stopped just outside the doorframe when I saw movement. Terrence was sitting up. He was not writhing. He was not clutching his leg. He was sitting up perfectly straight, reaching for the bottle of painkillers he kept on his bedside table, the ones he claimed were not strong enough. He opened the bottle and shook 2 pills into his hand. I expected him to swallow them. Instead, he leaned over the side of the bed. There was a large potted fern sitting there, a plant I had nurtured for 10 years. Terrence crushed the pills between his thumb and forefinger, crumbling them into white dust, and sprinkled them into the soil of the plant. He buried the powder with his finger, then wiped his hand on the sheet. He lay back down, arranged his face into a grimace of suffering, and let out a long, pathetic groan. "Dad," he yelled out. "Dad, please hurry. It hurts so much." I stood in the shadows holding the glass of water, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. He was not in pain, or at least not the kind of pain he was claiming. He was throwing away the medicine. Why? If he was hurting, he would take it. If he was an addict, he would hoard it. But he was discarding it. Then it hit me. The medicine made him sleepy. If he took it, he would sleep. If he slept, he could not order me around. He could not keep me running. He could not keep me exhausted and distracted. This was a performance. A cruel, calculated performance designed to wear me down, to break my spirit, to make me feel so guilty and helpless that I would agree to anything just to make the suffering stop, including selling my house. I looked at the fern. The leaves were already drooping slightly from the chemical assault. My son was poisoning my plant just as he was poisoning my life. I stepped back into the kitchen and poured the water down the sink. I gripped the edge of the counter and took a deep breath. I did not bring him the medicine. I let him call my name. I let him scream. Because for the first time since the accident, I knew exactly what game we were playing, and I was done playing by his rules. I walked to the back door and looked out at the dark yard. Somewhere out there in a nursing home, Etta May was waiting. I needed to find that USB drive. I needed to know the rest of the story before my son and his wife turned my home into a graveyard. The fog inside my head did not roll in all at once. It crept in slowly, like carbon monoxide filling a closed garage. For 40 years, I had prided myself on a memory that could track inventory across 3 different warehouses without looking at a spreadsheet. I knew the birthday of every man on my crew and the license plate number of every truck in the fleet. But a week after Courtney and Terrence moved into my home, I started losing time. I would wake up in my favorite armchair at 2 in the afternoon with no memory of eating lunch. I would stand in the middle of the kitchen staring at the refrigerator handle, forgetting why I had walked into the room. My hands, which had been steady enough to repair diesel engines, began to tremble so violently that I could barely button my own shirt. Courtney was always there during these moments. She hovered over me like a dark angel of mercy. She had taken over the kitchen, completely claiming that my diet was the source of my decline. Every morning she prepared a thick green smoothie that tasted of kale and something bitter and metallic. She stood over me with her arms crossed, watching my throat work as I swallowed every drop. She called it her special vitality blend. Along with the drink, she gave me 2 small blue pills. She said they were high-quality multivitamins imported from Europe, designed specifically for senior cognitive health. I took them because I wanted to trust her. I took them because part of me wanted to believe that she was actually trying to help. I took them because, deep down, I was terrified of the weakness spreading through my limbs, and I hoped she was right. But the more I took, the worse I got. The days blurred together into a gray smear of confusion. I spent hours staring at the television screen, unable to follow the plot of simple game shows. I felt heavy, like my bones were made of lead. I heard Terrence and Courtney talking in the other room, but their voices sounded distorted, as if I were listening to them from underwater. One afternoon, I tried to ask Terrence about the insurance adjuster. I wanted to know if they had inspected the car yet. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words came out slurred and jumbled. Terrence just looked at me with a pitying shake of his head and turned back to his video game. I felt trapped inside my own body, screaming for help while my mouth just drooled. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I decided I needed to feel useful. I needed to prove to myself that I was still the master of my own house. I walked to the sink to wash the dinner dishes. Courtney was sitting at the table filing her nails, and Terrence was on the sofa watching football. I picked up a ceramic plate. It was a simple white plate, part of the set my wife and I had bought for our first Thanksgiving. My hand was shaking. I tried to grip it tighter, but my fingers felt numb and disconnected from my brain. The plate slipped. It hit the tiled floor with a sound like a gunshot shattering into a dozen sharp pieces. The noise seemed to echo forever. I stood there staring at the shards, feeling a hot flush of shame crawl up my neck. I waited for Courtney to yell. I waited for her to scream about the mess, but she did not yell. What she did was far worse. She sighed. It was a long, loud, theatrical sigh. She stood up slowly and walked over to me, avoiding the broken ceramic. She put a hand on my shoulder and spoke in a voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, Curtis, not again. Look at this mess. You are becoming a danger to yourself." Terrence muted the television. He turned around, his face arranged into a mask of deep concern. "Dad, maybe Courtney is right. You are slipping fast. Yesterday you forgot my middle name. Today you are destroying the kitchen. It is not safe for you to be alone anymore." I tried to defend myself. I tried to say that it was just a plate, that my hand had slipped. But Courtney cut me off. She turned to Terrence and spoke as if I were not even in the room. "This is exactly what I was telling you, honey. He can't manage the household anymore. Imagine if he had left the stove on. Imagine if he had fallen. We need to look into legal options. He needs a guardian, someone to make decisions for him before he burns the house down. Guardian." The word hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I knew what that meant. It meant I would lose the right to my own money. It meant I would lose the right to my own home. It meant I would become a child in the eyes of the law, and they would be my parents. I looked at Terrence, expecting him to object, expecting him to say that his father was a strong, capable man. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Yeah, you are right, babe. We need to protect him from himself." I looked down at the broken plate, and I realized something terrifying. They were not worried about my safety. They were building a case. Every dropped spoon, every forgotten word, every hour I spent sleeping in the chair was being cataloged. They were documenting my decline so they could present it to a judge. They were gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind so they could steal my life. I felt a surge of adrenaline cut through the fog in my brain. It was small, but it was there. I let Courtney clean up the mess. I let her guide me to the bedroom like a toddler. I let her tuck me in, but I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I made a plan. I needed to know what was happening to me, and I needed to know before the sun went down tomorrow. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table as usual. Courtney placed the green smoothie and the 2 blue pills in front of me. "Drink up, Curtis," she said, smiling her shark smile. "You need your strength." I picked up the pills. My hand trembled, but this time the tremble was partly rage. I put the pills in my mouth. I took a sip of the smoothie. Courtney watched me closely. I made a gulping motion with my throat. "Good job," she said, patting my shoulder. "I will be in the garage with Terrence, helping him with his exercises. You just rest here." As soon as the door to the garage clicked shut, I spit the pills into my napkin. They were already starting to dissolve, leaving a bitter chemical taste on my tongue that made me want to gag. I wrapped the napkin tight and shoved it into my pocket. I grabbed my coat and my cane. I did not go out the front door where the neighbors might see me. I went out the back, slipping through the garden gate I had built years ago. The walk to the pharmacy was only 4 blocks, but it felt like a marathon. My legs were heavy and my balance was off. I had to stop twice to catch my breath, leaning against fences and trying to stop the world from spinning. But I kept moving. I was driven by the memory of Etta May's voice whispering, "Run." I pushed open the door of the neighborhood pharmacy. Mr. Henderson, the pharmacist, had known me for 20 years. He looked up from his counter and his smile faded when he saw my state. "Curtis," he said, coming around the counter. "You look terrible, man. Do you need an ambulance?" I shook my head, unable to speak for a moment. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled napkin. I opened it, revealing the 2 partially dissolved blue pills. "I need to know," I wheezed. "I need to know what these are." "My daughter-in-law says they are vitamins." Mr. Henderson put on his glasses. He picked up one of the pills with a pair of tweezers and examined the markings. He frowned. He walked back to his computer and typed something in. Then he walked to a shelf and pulled down a large bottle. He compared the pill in the napkin to the pills in the bottle. He turned back to me and his face was pale. "Curtis, who gave you these?" "Courtney," I said. "She says they are for memory." Mr. Henderson slammed the bottle down on the counter. The sound made me jump. "That is a lie," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "This is not a vitamin. This is haloperidol. It is a high-potency antipsychotic. It is used to treat severe schizophrenia or acute mania in psychiatric wards." I gripped the counter to keep from falling. "What does it do?" I asked. "It sedates you," Mr. Henderson explained. "In high doses like this, it causes confusion, lethargy, muscle tremors, and memory loss. It is a chemical straitjacket, Curtis. If you have been taking this daily, it explains why you can't walk straight. It explains why you can't think. You are being drugged." The room spun. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. It was not dementia. It was not old age. I was being lobotomized in my own kitchen. Every morning I was swallowing poison served by the hands of the people who claimed to love me. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively erasing my mind to speed up the process. I looked at Mr. Henderson. "Will it leave my system?" I asked. "If you stop taking it now, the effects will wear off in a few days," he said. "But Curtis, you cannot go back there. This is assault. This is attempted murder. I am calling the police." "No," I said sharply. "No police yet." Mr. Henderson looked at me like I was crazy. "Curtis, they are poisoning you." "I know," I said, straightening my back. The fog was still there, but the anger was burning it away. "If you call the police now, they will claim it was a mistake. They will claim I mixed up my own meds. They will claim I am senile and confused. I need proof, real proof. I need to catch them doing it." I took the napkin back. I looked at the blue pills one last time. They looked innocent enough, just small round circles of chalk. But they were the keys to my coffin. I put them back in my pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said. "If anyone asks, you did not see me today." I walked back home. The wind was biting at my face, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a cold clarity settling in my chest. I was going back into the lion's den. I was going to sit at that table, and I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to play the part of the confused, dying old man better than any actor in Hollywood. Because now I knew the script, and I was writing a new ending, one where the hunter becomes the prey. I slipped back through the garden gate just as I heard Courtney's voice calling from the kitchen. "Curtis. Curtis, where are you? It is time for your afternoon nap." I opened the back door and shuffled in, letting my shoulders slump and my mouth hang open slightly. "I am here, Courtney," I mumbled. "I was just looking for the cat." "We don't have a cat, Curtis," she said, shaking her head with a smirk. "Come on, let's get you to bed." I let her lead me away. But inside my pocket, my hand was clenched into a fist around the blue pills. The war had officially begun. The walk back from the pharmacy was a blur of cold wind and colder realization. But when I stepped onto my front porch, I forced my body to relax. I adjusted my posture, slumping my shoulders forward and relaxing my jaw to mimic the confused, medicated old man my family thought I was. I unlocked the front door quietly. The house was strangely silent. Usually the television was blaring reality shows or Terrence was shouting at his video games, but today there was a stillness that felt heavy and expectant. I moved through the hallway, avoiding the squeaky floorboards out of habit, a skill I had picked up when coming home late from double shifts at the warehouse so I would not wake my wife. I headed toward my bedroom, intending to hide the undissolved pills I had saved as evidence. The door to my master bedroom was supposed to be closed. I always closed it. It was the one rule I had enforced since they moved in. This room was my sanctuary, the last place in the house that still smelled like my wife's lavender potpourri and not Courtney's overpowering vanilla perfume. But as I rounded the corner, I saw the door standing ajar by a few inches. A sliver of light from the hallway cut across the carpet. I pushed the door open. The sight that greeted me made the blood hammer in my ears. Courtney was not in the kitchen making lunch. She was on her knees inside my walk-in closet. She was hunched over the small fireproof safe I kept bolted to the floor in the back corner. The digital keypad was beeping softly. Beep, 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 click. The sound of the locking mechanism disengaging was like a gunshot in the quiet room. She pulled the heavy steel door open. I stood frozen in the doorway watching her. She did not look like a thief in a movie. She did not look nervous. She looked entitled. She hummed a little tune as she reached her hand into the dark metal box that contained 40 years of my life's work. "Courtney," I said. My voice was rough, but I kept the volume low. She did not jump. She did not scream. She simply turned her head over her shoulder and looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were a child who had interrupted her while she was working. "Oh, there you are, Curtis," she said, standing up and brushing dust off her knees. "You really should not sneak up on people. It is bad for your heart." I walked into the closet. The space felt suddenly small and suffocating. "What are you doing in my safe, Courtney? Who gave you the combination?" She laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Curtis, do not be dramatic. Terrence gave it to me, obviously. We were looking for his insurance paperwork. You know how you get. You hide things in odd places and then you forget where you put them. We looked everywhere else and I figured you probably locked them up in here thinking they were gold bars. You are so paranoid lately." Her lies were smooth, polished stones. She was gaslighting me right to my face, standing over my open safe. She made it sound like I was the problem, like my desire for privacy was a symptom of my decline. I looked at the safe. The door was wide open. "Get out," I said. Courtney rolled her eyes. She stepped past me, patting my arm as she went. "Relax, Curtis. I didn't find the papers anyway. You probably used them as coasters. I am going to make lunch. Try to wash your hands this time, okay?" She walked out of the bedroom, leaving the door open behind her. She did not run. She did not apologize. She acted like she owned the closet, the safe, and the man standing in front of it. I listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway, followed by the sound of the television being turned on. She was fearless because she thought I was powerless. She thought the drugs had turned my brain into mush and that I would forget this encounter in an hour. I fell to my knees in front of the safe. My hands were shaking, not from the drugs this time, but from a rage so pure and hot it felt like it could melt the steel box. I reached inside. The stack of cash I kept for emergencies, about $3,000 in hundreds, was still there. That was the first thing that chilled me. A common thief would have taken the money. A desperate person would have taken the money. But Courtney had left it. This confirmed what Etta May had warned me about. This was not a robbery. It was a takeover. They did not want a few $1,000s. They wanted everything. I pulled out the blue accordion folder where I kept my legal documents. It felt lighter than usual. I unfastened the elastic band and spread the papers out on the floor. My birth certificate was there. My marriage license was there. The title to my truck was there. But the deed to the house was gone. My heart skipped a beat. I dug deeper, frantically shuffling through the papers. I was looking for the thick, cream-colored envelope that held my estate planning documents. I found it, but it was empty. The medical power of attorney document was missing. The durable power of attorney document was missing. I sat back on my heels, staring at the empty envelope. The air left my lungs. They had taken the deed to the house, and they had taken the legal authority to make decisions for me if I became incapacitated. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together. The drugs, the gaslighting about my memory, the fake concern. They were not just trying to sell the house. They were setting the stage to declare me mentally incompetent. With the power of attorney in their hands and a medical history of confusion and memory loss induced by the pills, they could legally sign the house over to themselves. They could put me in a state-run facility, and I would not be able to say a word. I would be a ward of the state, and they would be the guardians of my fortune. A memory flashed in my mind, vivid and painful. I was sitting at the kitchen table 15 years ago. Terrence was in high school. He had brought home a report card with straight A's. I was so proud. I had pinned it to the refrigerator. I bragged about it to the guys at the warehouse. 2 weeks later, the principal called me. Terrence had not gotten straight A's. He had failed 3 classes. He had scanned the report card into a computer and digitally altered the grades. He had forged the teacher's signature with a level of precision that was terrifying for a 16-year-old. I remembered confronting him. I remembered him crying, saying he just didn't want to disappoint me. I had punished him, but deep down I had been almost impressed by the skill. I thought it was just a teenager trying to avoid trouble. I thought he would grow out of it. I was a fool. He hadn't grown out of it. He had perfected it. That boy who forged a report card was now a man forging a life. He had likely used that same skill to convince Courtney that this plan would work. Or maybe Courtney was the architect, and Terrence was the willing tool. It didn't matter anymore. The son I raised was gone. The boy I taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball had been replaced by a predator who saw his father not as a human being, but as a resource to be harvested. I looked at the empty space in the safe where the deed used to be. That piece of paper represented every drop of sweat I had shed for 40 years. It represented the weekends I missed with my wife because I was working overtime. It represented the security I had promised her on her deathbed. I promised I would keep this house. I promised I would never let our legacy be squandered. I gathered the remaining papers and put them back in the safe. I locked it and spun the dial. Then I did something I had never done before. I took the key to the bedroom door from the hook inside the closet. I walked to the bedroom door and shut it. I turned the lock. Then I took a heavy wooden chair from my vanity and wedged it under the doorknob. It was a primitive barricade. It would not stop a battering ram, but it would stop a silent intruder. I sat on the edge of my bed. The house was quiet again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence of a trench before the whistle blows. I was behind enemy lines. My kitchen was compromised. My medicine cabinet was a weapon. My safe was breached. The people in the living room watching television were not my family. They were hostiles. I pulled the phone from my pocket. I needed to call my lawyer Harper, but I hesitated. If I called now and they heard me, the element of surprise would be lost. They had the documents, but they had not used them yet. They were waiting for the party. They were waiting for the public display of my incompetence to make the transfer of power look legitimate. I lay down on the bed fully clothed. I kept my hand in my pocket, fingers wrapped around the blue pills. I closed my eyes, but my senses were dialed up to 11. I could hear Courtney laughing in the living room. It was a light, happy sound. It was the sound of someone who thinks they have already won. Let her laugh, I thought. Let them think the old man is asleep. Let them think the drugs are working. Because when I wake up, I am not going to be Curtis the father. I am going to be Curtis the foreman. And on my shift, nobody steals from the warehouse. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. Tick, tick, tick. Time was running out, but for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what time it was. It was time to go to war. I waited until the sound of Courtney's car faded down the street before I made my move. She had gone to get her nails done, a weekly ritual she claimed was essential for her mental health, while my son lay in bed and I supposedly rotted away from dementia. I grabbed my coat and my cane, moving with a speed that would have shocked them both. My destination was not the pharmacy this time. It was the hospital. I needed to find Etta May. I needed to know why a woman I had met for 3 days was the only person in the world who saw the knife held at my throat. The hospital was a fortress of bureaucracy. The front desk was manned by a young woman with tired eyes and a headset who looked at me like I was just another confused senior citizen looking for the cafeteria. I asked for Etta May. She typed on her keyboard for a moment and then shook her head. "I am sorry, sir," she said without looking up. "That patient was discharged 2 days ago. We cannot give out personal information regarding patient transfers. It is against HIPAA regulations." I gripped the counter. I knew the rules. I knew she was just doing her job. But I did not have time for rules. I summoned every ounce of charm I had left, the charm of a man who had negotiated contracts with union leaders and calmed down angry truck drivers for 40 years. I leaned in and lowered my voice, making my hand tremble just enough to sell the performance. "Miss," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "I know the rules. I respect them. But Etta left her Bible. It has a picture of her late husband in it. She was crying for it before she left. I just want to mail it to her. I don't need to see her. I just need an address to send God's word to a dying woman." I held up a small black Bible I had taken from my own nightstand. The receptionist looked at the book and then at my distressed face. Her professional mask slipped. She looked around to see if her supervisor was watching. She sighed and scribbled something on a sticky note. She slid it across the counter face down. "Send it fast," she whispered. "That place she went to. They are not known for handling mail well." I took the note. It read, Shady Grove Care Center. The name sounded peaceful. The reality, as I would soon discover, was a nightmare. I walked out of the hospital feeling the weight of the address in my pocket. I had lied to get it, but for the first time in my life, the lie did not taste bitter. It tasted like necessary ammunition. I drove my truck to the address. It was on the south side of the city in a neighborhood where the streetlights were broken and the sidewalks were cracked. Shady Grove was a squat brick building with barred windows and a lawn that had turned to brown dust. The smell hit me the moment I walked through the automatic doors. It was the smell of urine masked by industrial-strength pine cleaner and the stale odor of boiled cabbage. This was not a care center. It was a warehouse for human beings who had been discarded by society. I found Etta in room 304. She was lying in a bed with gray sheets staring at a water stain on the ceiling. The room was hot and stuffy, and the only sound was the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. When I stepped into her line of sight, her eyes widened. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. "Curtis," she rasped. "You came." I pulled a metal chair next to her bed. It scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. "I am here, Etta," I said, taking her cold hand. "I am not crazy. I found the pills. I know what she is doing, but I need to know why she is doing it. You said she was your nurse. Tell me everything." Etta took a shallow breath. Her voice was weak, but her mind was sharp as a razor. 2 years ago, I lived in a brick bungalow on 87th Street, she began. My husband built it. I had a garden, I had a pension, but then I had a stroke. I needed help. The agency sent Courtney. She paused, swallowing hard as if the name itself was a poison. She was an Angel Curtis. That is how she gets you. She was so sweet. She cooked for me. She brushed my hair. She called me Mama. She told me her husband was struggling, that they were trying to have a baby but couldn't afford a bigger place. She made me feel sorry for her. She made me feel like I was the only one who could help her. I listened, my stomach churning. It was the same script, the same performance she was using on me. One day she brought papers. Etta continued. She said they were for the insurance company to approve a new wheelchair. She said it was routine. My eyes were bad, Curtis. I trusted her. I signed where she pointed. Etta's grip on my hand tightened. It wasn't for a wheelchair. It was a quitclaim deed. I signed over my house for $1. $1 Curtis. And the other paper was a power of attorney. 2 weeks later, she put me in here. She sold my house. She sold my furniture. She even sold my wedding ring. And when I tried to scream, when I tried to tell the doctors, she told them I had vascular dementia. She told them I was paranoid. And because she was a nurse, they believed her. I looked around the bleak room. This was my future. This was exactly where I would be in a month if I did not stop them. I would be lying in a bed smelling of pine cleaner, staring at a water stain while Courtney and Terrence drank champagne in my living room. "But how do you know about the accident?" I asked. "How do you know it wasn't a dog?" Etta smiled a grim, toothless smile. "Because she came to visit me once," she said. "Right before the crash. She didn't come to apologize. She came to gloat. She thought I was too far gone to understand. She was on the phone with your son. She was screaming at him. She told him he had to do it. She told him to crash the car. She said if he didn't, she would leave him and take every penny they had stolen from me. She said, I don't care if you break your neck, just make sure the car is totaled so we can blame the old man." My blood ran cold. My son had not just been reckless. He had been coerced. He was a coward, yes, but he was a coward being driven by a psychopath. Etta reached under her pillow. Her movements were slow and painful. She pulled out a small pair of knitted socks. She handed them to me. "Look inside the left one," she whispered. I felt something hard in the toe of the sock. I reached in and pulled out a silver USB drive. It was small, innocuous, but it felt heavy in my hand. "What is this?" I asked. "I may be paralyzed, Curtis," she said, her eyes burning with a fierce light. "But I am not deaf, and I am not stupid. After she stole my house, I bought a voice-activated recorder. I hid it in my flower vase. I recorded every time she came to taunt me. I recorded her phone calls. I recorded her bragging about how easy it was to trick old people. It is all on there, including the call where she planned your accident." I stared at the silver device. This was not just evidence. It was a nuclear weapon. "Why didn't you use it?" I asked. "Who would listen to me?" she said sadly. "I am just a crazy old woman in a state home. But you, Curtis, you are still out there. You can still fight." I closed my fingers around the drive. I stood up. The fear I had felt for the last week evaporated, completely replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I looked at Etta May lying in that terrible bed, a victim of the woman who was currently sleeping under my roof. "I am going to get you out of here, Etta," I said. My voice was steady. "I promise you, I am going to get my house back. I am going to send them to prison, and then I am coming back for you. You are not going to die in this room." Etta nodded, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "Go," she whispered, "before they realize you are gone. Give them hell, Curtis. Give them hell for both of us." I walked out of Shady Grove Care Center into the gray afternoon light. I clutched the USB drive in my pocket so tight it dug into my palm. I was not just a father anymore. I was a witness. I was a prosecutor. And Judgment Day was coming to my living room. I got into my truck and started the engine. The roar of the motor sounded like a battle cry. I drove home not as a victim, but as a man with a loaded gun in his pocket ready to face the monsters in his own house. I sat in the small motel room 3 miles from my own house, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The hidden cameras I had installed during the hours Courtney and Terrence thought I was sleeping were working perfectly. On the screen I saw my son Brad pacing around my study like a caged tiger. He was tearing through my bookshelves, pulling out volumes of encyclopedias and tossing them onto the floor. He was not looking for literature, he was looking for money, or, since I had left the house that morning without a word, he had panicked. He knew he could not declare me incompetent if I was not there to be examined, so he had resorted to plain old-fashioned looting. I watched him freeze as his hand landed on the red leather binder I had planted on the top shelf. It was a dusty old ledger I had prepared weeks ago for this exact moment. Inside I had forged a document that looked like a bank statement from a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The balance I had typed in was exactly $500,000 in liquid cash. I also included a note written in my own shaky handwriting that said, "Emergency funds, safe code access only." Brad opened the binder. I zoomed in on the feed. His eyes bulged. He licked his lips. It was the look of a starving wolf spotting a wounded deer. He did not check the date. He did not wonder why a retired warehouse foreman would have $500,000 in an offshore account. Greed is a blinder. It shuts down the logical part of the brain and leaves only the hunger. He grabbed the binder and ran out of the room screaming for his wife. "Jessica, look at this. You won't believe what the old man has been hiding." I leaned back in my motel chair and took a sip of lukewarm water. The bait had been taken. Now I just had to wait for the trap to snap shut. On the screen, the scene shifted to the kitchen. Jessica was chopping vegetables with a butcher knife, slamming the blade down with unnecessary force. Brad burst in, waving the red binder. "Look," he shouted, slamming it onto the counter. "$500,000, Jessica. $500,000. It says here it is in a floor safe. I knew he was holding out on us. I knew that pension story was garbage." Jessica stopped chopping. She wiped her hands on a towel and snatched the binder. She scanned the page, her eyes narrowing. "A floor safe," she muttered. "Where? We have looked everywhere." "It must be under the floorboards in the master bedroom," Brad said, pacing frantically. "Or maybe in the basement. But that is not the problem. The note says access code only. If we try to drill it, we might trigger a lock mechanism. We need the code." Jessica threw the binder down, her face twisted into a cold calculation. "So we can't kick him out," she said. "If we kick him out, he takes the code with him. If we declare him incompetent, the state might seize the assets to pay for his care. We need him here." Brad nodded vigorously. "Exactly. We need him back in the house. But we can't let him roam free anymore. If he has this kind of money, he might try to run. He might try to leave it to Zola or donate it to some charity." Jessica picked up the knife again, turning it over in her hand. The light caught the sharp edge. "Okay," she said softly. "We bring him back. We play nice. We tell him we were wrong. We tell him we want to start over. And once he is through that door, we change the locks. We move him into the basement room. We tell the neighbors he is too sick to have visitors, and we keep him there until he gives us that code." I watched them plot my imprisonment. They were discussing kidnapping their own father as if they were discussing what to order for dinner. There was no hesitation, no moral struggle, just the cold, hard math of greed. Jessica suggested upping my dosage of the blue pills to make me more compliant. Brad suggested threatening to cut off my access to Zola, my granddaughter, if I did not cooperate. They did not know that Zola was safe at her mother's house in Ohio. They did not know that I had already transferred my real savings into a trust fund for her education that neither of them could touch. They were plotting against a ghost. Then Brad pulled out his phone. "It is time," he said. "I am going to call him. I am going to give him the performance of a lifetime. My own phone on the motel nightstand began to ring. The screen flashed my son's name. I let it ring 3 times. 4 times. I needed him to sweat. I needed him to think I might not answer. On the 5th ring, I picked up. I did not speak. I let my breathing sound heavy and ragged into the receiver. Dad Brad's voice cracked. It was a masterpiece of fake emotion. Dad, where are you? We have been so worried. I came home and you were gone. Please tell me you are safe. I cleared my throat, making my voice tremble. I am safe, Brad. I just needed some air. I felt confused. Oh, Dad, I am so sorry. Brad sobbed. I saw him on the camera squeezing his eyes shut to force out tears. We have been pushing you too hard. Jessica and I, we had a long talk. We realized we have been terrible. The stress of the accident, the money, it turned us into people we are not. We love you, Dad. We want you to come home. I stayed silent, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Dad, are you there? Brad asked, his voice rising in panic. Please come home. Zola is here. She keeps asking for her papa. She is crying, Dad. She wants to show you her drawing. He was using my granddaughter as bait. He was dangling the one person I loved more than life itself to lure me into a cage. The rage flared in my chest, hot and white, but I pushed it down. I needed to be the senile old man one last time. Zola is there, I asked, my voice filled with fake hope. My sweet Zola. Yes, she is right here, Brad lied smoothly. She is waiting for you. We are making your favorite pot roast. Please, Dad, let us make it right. Come home. I let out a long, shuddering sigh. Okay, son. Okay. I will come home. I wanted to see the lake one last time. I thought maybe I wouldn't come back. Don't say that, Brad cried. Don't you ever say that. You are the head of this family. We need you. Come home now. I will leave the front door unlocked. I hung up the phone. On the laptop screen, I saw Brad lower the phone and pump his fist in the air. He turned to Jessica and high-fived her. He is coming, he said, grinning. Get the basement ready. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The man looking back at me was not the confused victim they thought was coming home to be slaughtered. He was a general marching into battle. They wanted the code to the safe. I would give them a code, all right. But it would not open a safe of gold. It would open a door to a hell they could not even imagine. I packed my bag. I checked my pocket for the USB drive from Etta May. I checked my phone to make sure the audio recorder was running. I was going back to my house. I was going back to the basement. But I was not going to be their prisoner. I was going to be their judge, their jury, and their executioner. And the sentence was going to be total destruction. I put on my hat, adjusted my coat, and walked out into the night. The game was over. The war had just begun. I stood on the front porch of the house I had paid for with 40 years of sweat and stared at the front door. The wreath of dried flowers my late wife had hung there 3 Christmases ago was gone, replaced by a generic welcome sign that looked like it cost $5 at a discount store. It was a small detail, but it screamed that I was no longer the master of this domain. I took a deep breath, checking the recording app on the phone in my pocket one last time before pushing the door open. The smell of roast beef hit me instantly, rich and savory, masking the rot that had taken hold of my family. Brad was there in an instant, wearing a smile that did not reach his eyes. He hugged me. His grip was too tight, too performative. I felt his hands patting my back, not in affection, but as if he were checking for a wire. Fortunately, I had taped the recorder to the inside of my calf under my sock. "Welcome home, Dad," he said, pulling back to look at me with feigned concern. "You look tired." "We were so worried. Come in. Sit down. Jessica made your favorite." I shuffled inside, letting my feet drag slightly on the hardwood floor, playing the part of the weary, confused old man. I allowed him to guide me to the dining room table. The table was set with the good china plates I had not seen since my wife's funeral. Jessica emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She kissed my cheek. Her lips were cold and she smelled of wine. "I am so glad you are back, Wallace," she said. "We missed you." I sat down. Brad immediately reached for a bottle of expensive Cabernet. I recognized the label. It was a bottle I had been saving for my granddaughter's wedding day. He popped the cork without a second thought and filled my glass to the brim. "Drink up, Dad," he urged, pushing the glass toward me. "It will help you relax. You have had a long day." I looked at the dark red liquid. I knew exactly what was happening. They wanted me pliable. They wanted me drunk or drugged so I would be easier to manipulate. I picked up the glass, my hand trembling intentionally. I took a small sip, and then as Brad turned to serve the potatoes, I brought the napkin to my mouth and spit the wine into the thick fabric. I did this again and again throughout the meal. I pretended to gulp down the wine while actually emptying the glass into the napkin or the potted plant behind me when they weren't looking. "This is delicious," I mumbled, slurring my words slightly. "Thank you. I don't know why I left. I got confused." Brad exchanged a look with Jessica, a look of triumph. "See," he whispered to her. "He is already out of it." Then he refilled my glass. "Keep drinking, Dad," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "We have a lot to talk about. The alcohol is good for your circulation." I watched him pour. He was not drinking. Neither was Jessica. They were sober predators watching their prey ingest what they thought was a sedative. The roast beef tasted like ash in my mouth, but I chewed and swallowed, forcing myself to smile gratefully at the people who were plotting my demise. Then the kitchen door opened and my heart stopped. Zola walked in, my 12-year-old granddaughter who was supposed to be safe in Ohio. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was messy and her eyes were red and puffy. She was wearing pajamas that looked too thin for the drafty house. She did not run to me. She stood by the door looking at her father with terrified obedience. Brad set his fork down. The fake smile vanished, replaced by the stern look of a director cueing an actor. "Zola, come here," he commanded. "Tell Grandpa what we talked about." Zola walked to the table. She looked at me and her lip trembled. "Hi, Grandpa," she whispered. I wanted to jump up and hug her. I wanted to take her out of this house immediately. But I couldn't break character. Not yet. "Zola, honey," I said, reaching out a shaking hand. "What are you doing here?" Brad nudged her hard. "Go on, Zola. Tell him about school. Tell him about the house." Zola took a shuddering breath. She began to recite a speech that sounded like it had been written by a lawyer and drilled into her head for hours. "Grandpa, we are in trouble. Daddy says we are going to lose our house. He says I can't go to dance class anymore because we don't have money. He says..." She paused, tears spilling over her cheeks. "He says it is because you won't help us. He says you have money hidden away, but you don't care if we end up on the street." The words were like knives. They were using a child, a 12-year-old girl, to guilt me into submission. They had weaponized her innocence. Brad leaned forward, his face twisting into a mask of tragic desperation. "See, Dad, see what you are doing. I didn't want to bring her into this, but she needs to know why her life is falling apart. She needs to know that her grandpa is sitting on a pile of cash while she cries herself to sleep." I looked at Zola. I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't afraid of poverty. She was afraid of her father. She was afraid of saying the wrong line. "I am sorry, Zola," I mumbled, letting a tear roll down my cheek. "I didn't know. I forgot. I forget everything these days." Jessica chimed in, stroking Zola's hair with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. "It is okay, sweetie. Grandpa is going to fix it. Aren't you, Wallace? You are going to give us the code to the safe so Zola can keep dancing." "Right." I looked at my granddaughter. I signaled her with my eyes, a tiny wink that only she would see. It was a signal we used to use when we played hide and seek. It meant, "Stay still, I am coming for you." She blinked, surprised, but she stopped crying. I slumped back in my chair, letting my head loll to the side as if the wine and exhaustion were finally taking their toll. "I am so tired," I groaned. "I just want to help. I want Zola to be happy." "Then help us," Brad hissed, leaning over the table. "Give us the code, Wallace. The code for the offshore account. We saw the ledger. We know about the 500,000. I closed my eyes, letting out a heavy sigh. The money, yes. The money in the Cayman account. It is for the family. But what?" Jessica snapped. I opened my eyes halfway, looking unfocused. I set it up with a contingency. A medical contingency. The banker, Mr. Silva, he was very strict. He said I can only access the full amount if I am incapacitated. The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. "What do you mean incapacitated?" Brad asked slowly. I licked my lips. I mean, sick, really sick, or mentally unfit. If I am healthy, the money stays locked for 10 more years to gain interest. But if I am unable to care for myself, then the guardian can access it all immediately to pay for my care. I saw the look that passed between Brad and Jessica. It was electric. It was the look of two people who had just been handed the key to the kingdom but realized they had to turn it in a lock made of blood. "So let me get this straight," Brad said, his voice trembling with excitement. "If you are fine, we get nothing. But if you are, say, having a severe mental breakdown or a stroke, then we get access to the $500,000. "Yes," I whispered, burying my face in my hands. "That is why I didn't tell you. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be sick." Jessica stood up. She walked behind my chair and began to massage my shoulders. Her hands were strong, digging into my muscles. "Oh, Wallace," she cooed, "you are already sick. Don't you see? You are confused. You are forgetting things. You are practically incapacitated already. We just need to make it official, for your own good." Brad nodded slowly, a dark smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, for your own good, Dad, and for Zola." I peeked through my fingers. I saw Brad pick up his phone and type a message. I knew who he was texting. He was texting the corrupt doctor they had on speed dial. He was texting the lawyer. They weren't going to wait for nature to take its course. They were going to accelerate my decline. I stood up, swaying on my feet. I need to lie down," I stammered. "I don't feel well. The wine—" "Yes," Brad said, standing up and guiding me toward the basement door, not the stairs to my bedroom, but the door to the finished basement. "Go rest, Dad. We fixed up the suite downstairs for you. It is quieter there, no stairs to fall down." I let them lead me to the basement. I let them think I was a stumbling, drunk old man walking into his own prison. But as I descended the stairs, I felt the weight of the phone on my leg, recording every word. They had just admitted they wanted me incapacitated. They had admitted they knew about the money. And they had swallowed the lie about the medical clause hook, line, and sinker. Brad closed the door at the top of the stairs. I heard the distinct click of a deadbolt sliding into place. They had locked me in. I sat down on the edge of the futon in the dim basement light. I pulled the phone from my sock and stopped the recording. I saved the file. Then I sent it to my lawyer Harper with a simple text message. They took the bait. Get the police ready. I looked up at the small basement window. I could see the wheels of Brad's car in the driveway. The dinner was over. The reconciliation was a lie. But the trap I had set was perfect. They thought they had buried me in the dark. They forgot that I was a seed. And come morning, I was going to tear their world apart from the roots up. The morning sun filtered through the small basement window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air of my prison. I had been awake for hours, sitting on the edge of the sofa bed, listening to the footsteps above my head. Every creak of the floorboards told a story. I heard Brad pacing back and forth in the kitchen, his heavy steps betraying his anxiety. I heard the sharp click of Jessica's heels as she moved with purpose, likely preparing the next stage of my undoing. Around 10 o'clock, the heavy deadbolt on the basement door slid back. I slumped my shoulders, instantly transforming from a vigilant warrior into a defeated old man. Brad walked down the stairs first, followed by a man I had never seen before. The stranger was short, with slicked back hair and a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly. He carried a leather briefcase that looked more like a prop than a medical tool. Brad gestured toward me with a hand that trembled slightly. "Here he is, doctor," he said, his voice laced with fake sorrow. "My father, Wallace. He has been like this since yesterday, confused, aggressive. He does not even know where he is." The man who Brad called a doctor did not introduce himself to me. He did not offer a hand to shake. He simply pulled a metal folding chair from the corner and sat opposite me. He opened his briefcase. There was no stethoscope inside. There was no blood pressure cuff. There was only a stack of legal forms and a gold pen. I looked at him with glassy eyes, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "State your name for the record," the doctor said, his tone bored and flat. I looked at Brad. He nodded encouragingly. "Tell Dr. Evans your name, Dad." I am Wallace," I stammered. I need to go to work. The shift starts at 6. Dr. Evans did not check my pupils. He did not ask about my medical history. He simply checked a box on his form. Disorientation regarding time and place, he muttered aloud as he wrote. I decided to push the performance. I looked at the doctor and grabbed his wrist. My wife, I whispered urgently. Mary, she is waiting in the car. Tell her I will be right out. We are going to the drive-in movie. Mary had been dead for 5 years. Brad let out a long sigh, a performance for the doctor's benefit. You see, doctor, he is living in the past. It is getting worse. Yesterday he tried to attack my wife because he thought she was an intruder. We are terrified for his safety, and ours. The doctor nodded, lacking any genuine empathy. It seems like a clear case of advanced dementia with paranoid delusions. I can certify him as incompetent immediately. The court will grant you emergency guardianship by the end of the week given the violent tendencies you described. I sat there and watched them sign away my freedom. This man was not a doctor. He was a hired gun, a mercenary with a medical license who likely made his living facilitating scams like this. He did not care that I was lucid. He cared about the envelope of cash I saw bulging in Brad's back pocket. I let out a low moan and rocked back and forth, hugging my knees. Inside my mind, however, I was memorizing the doctor's face. I was memorizing the name on his badge, Doctor. Evans was going to lose his license. I would make sure of that. But for now, I had to be the madman they paid for. After the doctor left, the atmosphere in the basement shifted. The tension did not dissipate, it thickened. Around noon, Jessica came down the stairs. She was carrying a tray with a steaming mug of tea and a plate of soft cookies. She wore a floral apron and a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator assuring its prey that the slaughter would be painless. Here you go, Wallace, she cooed, setting the tray on the small coffee table. I made you some herbal tea. It will help with the agitation. The doctor said you need to stay hydrated. I looked at the tea. The liquid was dark, almost black, and it smelled of chamomile and something else. Something chemical and bitter that tried to hide under the scent of flowers. I knew that smell. It was the same smell as the crushed pills I had found in the plant upstairs. They were done waiting for the pills to work slowly. They were upping the dosage. They wanted me unconscious for whatever came next. Thank you, Jessica, I mumbled, reaching for the cup with a shaking hand. You are a good girl. She sat on the arm of the sofa watching me. She was not going to leave until I drank it. Drink it while it is hot, she urged. I lifted the cup to my lips. The steam hit my face, carrying that chemical warning. I feigned a sudden spasm. My hand jerked violently and I splashed a little of the hot liquid onto my lap. Ouch, I cried, dropping the cup back onto the saucer with a clatter. Careful. Jessica snapped, her patience fraying for a split second before she recovered her composure. Let me help you. She reached for a napkin to dab at my pants. In that split second, while her head was bowed and her eyes were focused on my leg, I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I tipped the contents of the mug into the large decorative vase of fake hydrangeas that stood on the table next to me. The dark liquid disappeared into the dense artificial moss at the base of the flowers. When she looked up a second later, I was bringing the empty cup back to my lips, tilting my head back and swallowing air. I let out a satisfied sigh and set the empty cup down. That was good, I said, wiping my mouth. Jessica peered into the empty cup. She smiled. Good. You will feel sleepy soon, Wallace. Just close your eyes. We will take care of everything. She took the tray and went upstairs. As soon as the lock clicked, I stood up and walked to the vase. I could smell the acrid odor of the drugs rising from the plastic flowers. I pulled out my phone and took a close-up photo of the stained moss. Then I went back to the sofa and waited. I knew the script. I had to play the part. 10 minutes later, I let my body go limp. I sprawled out on the sofa, letting my mouth fall open, and my breathing turn heavy and rhythmic. I was playing dead to stay alive. 20 minutes later, the door opened again. This time, both Brad and Jessica came down. They moved quietly, whispering to each other. Is he out? Brad asked. He drank the whole cup, Jessica replied. He should be out cold for at least 4 hours. That dose would knock out a horse. Brad walked over and prodded my shoulder. Dad, he said loudly. Dad, can you hear me? I did not move. I did not flinch. I kept my breathing steady, focusing on the rise and fall of my chest. He is gone, Brad said with a laugh. Okay, let's set it up. I heard the sound of a tripod being extended. I heard the beep of a video camera turning on. Then I felt something being pressed into my hand. It was cold and heavy. A kitchen knife. Brad wrapped my limp fingers around the handle. Then he stepped back. "Okay, action," he whispered. Suddenly the room exploded with noise. But I was not the one making it. Brad began to scream. "Dad, stop! Put the knife down! Dad, please don't hurt me!" I heard the sound of breaking glass. Brad had picked up a lamp and smashed it against the wall. He kicked the coffee table, overturning it. He grabbed the cushions from the sofa and threw them around the room. Jessica screamed in the background, a shrill, terrified sound. "Help! He is going to kill us. He has a knife. Call the police." I lay there, eyes closed, heart hammering against my ribs, listening to my own son and daughter-in-law stage a murder attempt. They were creating the evidence that would lock me away forever. The video would show a chaotic room, a smashed lamp, and me passing out on the sofa with a weapon in my hand. The audio would tell the story of a violent rampage. It was evil. It was perfect. Brad ran over to me and grabbed my shirt, shaking me violently. "Dad, wake up! Look what you did, you crazy old bastard!" He slapped my face. It stung, but I did not react. I remained a rag doll in his hands. "Cut," he said, suddenly dropping me back onto the cushions. His voice returned to normal instantly. "How was that?" Jessica giggled. "It was perfect. The angle was great. You couldn't see that you threw the lamp. It just looks like he knocked it over before passing out. This secures the emergency order. No judge will deny us after seeing this. Make sure you get a close-up of the knife in his hand," Brad said. I felt the camera lens hovering near my face. I held my breath. I wanted to open my eyes and scream. I wanted to drive the knife into the floor and stand up, but I knew that would end the game too soon. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to submit this video to the court, because the moment they did, they would be submitting evidence of their own crime. My phone taped to my calf was recording everything. It was recording the silence before the screaming. It was recording Brad's direction to cut. It was recording their laughter. "Okay, let's go," Brad said. "Leave him here. We will call 911 in an hour. We will say we locked him down here for our own safety after he attacked us." They walked up the stairs, leaving me in the wreckage of their staged violence. The basement smelled of spilled tea and betrayal. I opened my eyes. I looked at the knife in my hand. It was a bread knife, dull and serrated. It was the only tool they thought I was worthy of. I sat up slowly. I took the knife and placed it carefully on the table. I looked at the smashed lamp. I looked at the overturned table. They had destroyed my furniture to destroy my life. I reached down and stopped the recording on my phone. I sent the file to Harper. Then I sent a text message. "They are calling 911 in 1 hour. Bring the police now. Tell them you have evidence of a false report in progress." I lay back down on the sofa amidst the chaos. I closed my eyes again, but this time I was smiling. They thought they were the directors of this movie. They did not realize that I had just taken over the editing room, and the final cut was going to be a tragedy for them. The basement air was stale and cold, but the laptop screen Brad placed on the wobbly card table was glowing with the harsh blue light of the 21st century courtroom. This was the new face of justice. There were no wood-paneled walls, no bailiff, and no jury box. Just a grid of pixels on a Zoom call that would decide whether I spent the rest of my life as a free man or a prisoner in my own home. Brad sat next to me. He had changed into a somber navy blue sweater that made him look responsible and burdened. He positioned the camera so it caught the gloom of the basement behind us, a calculated choice to make me look like I was already living in squalor due to my own neglect. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, wearing the same stained shirt they had forced me to wear for 2 days. I let my head hang low, playing the part of the medicated invalid. But under the table, my leg was bouncing with a rhythm that was all adrenaline. The judge appeared on the screen, Judge Holloway. She was a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose and a pile of files behind her that looked like they were about to topple over. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who wanted to get through her docket and go home. That was what Brad was counting on. He was counting on the system being too busy to look closely at one sad old man. "Mr. King," the judge said, looking at Brad, "you have filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship of your father, Wallace King. You claim he is in immediate danger to himself and others. This is a serious allegation." Brad leaned into the camera. He let out a long, shaky breath. "I know, Your Honor, and it breaks my heart to be here. My father has always been my hero, but since the accident—" He paused, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. He has changed. He is not the man who raised me. He is paranoid. He is aggressive. Yesterday he attacked me and my wife with a knife. We had to lock him in the basement suite for everyone's safety. We are terrified, Your Honor. We just want to get him the help he needs and protect his assets before he squanders them in his confusion. He played the clip. The video they had staged yesterday filled the screen. There I was lying on the couch with a knife in my hand while Brad screamed in the background. It looked damning. It looked exactly like the aftermath of a violent psychotic break. I watched the judge's face. She frowned. She leaned closer to her screen. The evidence was compelling. "Mr. King," she said, addressing me, "do you have anything to say? Do you understand why you are here?" I looked up slowly. I let my jaw slacken. I want to go home," I mumbled. I want my wife. Mary. Where is Mary?" Brad put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it tight. "See, Your Honor," he whispered. "Mom has been dead for 5 years. He doesn't even know what year it is." The judge sighed. She picked up her pen, ready to sign the order that would strip me of my rights. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was waiting. I was waiting for the signal. Then the judge stopped. She looked at a small box in the corner of her screen. "We have a witness here," she said. "A minor. Zola King." My blood froze. Brad had brought Zola into this. He pulled her into the frame. She was sitting on a chair behind him, out of my sight until now. My granddaughter looked smaller than ever. Her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped bird. She was wearing her Sunday dress, but it looked wrinkled. "Zola," the judge said, her voice softening. "I know this is scary, honey, but your daddy says you saw what happened yesterday. He says you are scared of your grandpa. Is that true?" Brad's hand moved from my shoulder to Zola's. I saw his fingers dig into her collarbone. It was a subtle movement, invisible to the camera, but I felt the threat radiating off him. He was not comforting her. He was reminding her of the script. Zola looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears. I looked back at her and I tried to send her a message with my eyes. I tried to tell her it was okay. I tried to tell her I forgave her in advance. She looked down at her lap. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "Grandpa." Grandpa got mad. He had a knife. He screamed at Daddy. The judge leaned in. "Zola, look at me. Are you afraid of him?" Zola hesitated. I saw her chest hitch. She was 12 years old and she was being asked to choose between her father and her grandfather. She was being asked to carry a burden that would crush a grown man. She knew that if she told the truth, her father would go to jail. She knew that if her father went to jail, she might end up in foster care. Brad had terrified her with stories of the system. He had told her that if she didn't help him, they would all be on the street. "Yes," Zola choked out. "I am scared. Please don't let him hurt us. I don't want Daddy to leave." She burst into tears and buried her face in Brad's sleeve. Brad hugged her, looking at the camera with the face of a protective father shielding his child from a monster. "You see, Your Honor," Brad said, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. "He has traumatized her. Please grant the guardianship. Let us end this nightmare." I closed my eyes. A single tear leaked out, but it was not the tear of a senile old man. It was the tear of a grandfather whose heart had just been shattered. He had used her love and her fear to turn her into a perjurer. He had destroyed her innocence to steal my money. That was the moment I stopped viewing him as my son. He was a cancer, and I was the surgeon. The judge nodded solemnly. "Based on the testimony and the video evidence, I am inclined to grant the emergency temporary guardianship. I will set a full hearing for—" "Objection, Your Honor." The voice was sharp, clear, and authoritative. It cut through the basement silence like a whip. A new window popped up on the Zoom screen. It was Alana Vance, my attorney. She was sitting in her office, flanked by shelves of law books, wearing a suit that cost more than Brad's car. Her face was stone cold. "Ms. Vance," the judge said, surprised, "you are appearing for the respondent." "I am, Your Honor," Alana said, "and I am appearing to file an emergency motion to dismiss this petition with prejudice and to submit evidence of perjury, fraud, and elder abuse." Brad stiffened next to me. "Who is that?" he hissed. Alana did not waste time. "Your Honor, the petitioner. Mr. Brad King claims his father is suffering from advanced dementia and violent psychosis. He claims the video he showed you depicts a spontaneous attack. I am sending you a file right now. It is a video recorded on my client's phone yesterday afternoon." Brad's face went pale. He looked at me. I slowly lifted my head. The slack-jawed expression was gone. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled. It was a wolf's smile. On the screen, a new video started playing. It was the footage from yesterday. But it was not the footage Brad had shot. It was the footage from my phone taped to my leg. The court watched in silence as the video showed me pretending to pass out. Then they heard Brad's voice clear as a bell. Cut. How was that? They heard Jessica's giggle. It was perfect. You couldn't see that you threw the lamp. They heard the plotting. They heard the laughter. They heard the cold calculation of a staged crime scene. The judge's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. She took off her glasses and put them back on as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "But I am not done, Your Honor." Alana continued, her voice relentless. "Mr. King claims his father is confused and medicated. That is partially true. He is medicated because his daughter-in-law has been poisoning his tea with haloperidol, a powerful antipsychotic." Another video played. The video of Jessica pouring the powder into my cup. The video of me pouring it into the plant. And then a photo of the toxicology report from the sample I had sent to Alana's lab earlier that week. And finally Alana said, "Regarding my client's mental state, Mr. Wallace King visited a state-certified neurologist 3 days ago. He scored a 30 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment. He is of sound mind, he is of sound body, and he is currently being held prisoner in his own basement." The silence on the call was deafening. Zola had stopped crying and was looking at the screen with wide eyes. Brad was shaking. He was shaking so hard the laptop on the table was vibrating, Mr. King, the judge said. Her voice was no longer tired. It was terrifying. It was the voice of the law waking up. "You will remain exactly where you are. I am dispatching the sheriff's department to your location immediately." Brad slammed the laptop shut. The screen went black. He stood up, knocking the chair over. He looked at me. His eyes were wild. "You old bastard," he screamed. "You set me up." I stood up. I did not need the table for support. I stood to my full height, which was 3 inches taller than him. I squared my shoulders. "I didn't set you up, Brad," I said, my voice steady and deep. "I just let you be yourself. And you hung yourself with your own rope." He lunged for me, but I was ready. I sidestepped and he crashed into the wall. "Run," I told him. "You might make it to the front door before the cops get here, but you won't make it far." He looked at the door. He looked at Zola, who was shrinking into the corner. He looked at me. And then he ran. He ran like the coward he was, leaving his child and his wife behind to face the music. I walked over to Zola and knelt down. I pulled her into my arms. She was shaking. "It is okay, baby," I whispered, stroking her hair. "It is over. Grandpa is here, and nobody is ever going to make you lie again." I heard the sirens in the distance. They were getting louder. To some, they sound like alarm. To me, they sounded like a choir of angels. Justice was arriving, and it was driving a squad car. The laptop screen went black, ending the Zoom call, and with it the last shred of my son's sanity. Brad did not just get angry. He disintegrated. The mask of the concerned, grieving son vanished instantly, replaced by the contorted face of a desperate animal that had just realized the trap was biting into its leg. He grabbed the metal folding chair he had been sitting on and hurled it across the basement. It crashed into the shelves I had built with my own hands, sending jars of screws and old paint cans clattering to the concrete floor. The noise was deafening in the small space, but it was nothing compared to the roar that erupted from his throat. "You little traitor," he screamed, spinning around to face the corner where Zola was cowering. "You ruined everything. I told you to stick to the script. I told you exactly what to say. You stupid little girl. Do you know what you just did? You just put us on the street." Zola pressed herself against the cold cinder block wall, wrapping her arms around her knees and sobbing. She looked terrified, not just of his anger, but of the sudden violence that had erupted from the man who was supposed to protect her. Brad took a step toward her, his hands curled into fists. His eyes were not seeing his daughter. They were seeing a liability. They were seeing the reason he was about to lose the fortune he had already spent in his mind. I stepped between them. I am 68 years old. My knees ache when it rains and my back is stiff in the mornings, but in that moment I felt none of it. I felt only the cold, hard strength of a man defending the innocent. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout. I simply expanded my chest and stood my ground, a silent wall between a predator and his prey. "Don't you take another step," I said. My voice was low, a rumble from deep in my chest. "You are done, Brad. You are done hurting her. You are done hurting me." The show is over." Brad stopped. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw him calculate his odds. He was younger, he was stronger, but he saw something in my eyes that he had never seen before. He saw the warehouse foreman who had broken up fights between men twice his size. He saw the father who had finally decided that discipline was necessary. He sneered and backed away, kicking a cardboard box as he paced the room. "You think you won, old man," he spat. "You think a judge on a screen matters. This is my house, I live here, I have rights, squatters' rights, tenants' rights, you can't just throw me out. I will drag this out for years. I will make your life a living hell. I will rot in this basement before I let you win." He was pacing faster now, talking to himself, working himself up into a frenzy of entitlement. He was convincing himself that he was the victim. He was rewriting reality in real time to justify his greed. He blamed the judge. He blamed the lawyer. He blamed Zola. He blamed everyone but the man in the mirror. Then the sound of heavy boots on the floorboards upstairs stopped him mid-sentence. It was not the tentative step of a visitor. It was the heavy, authoritative thud of the law. The pounding on the basement door shook the frame. "Sheriff's Department," a voice boomed. "Open up!" Brad froze. His face went pale. The bluster drained out of him, leaving behind a shivering coward. He looked at the stairs. He looked at the high window. There was nowhere to go. I walked past him. I took Zola's hand and helped her up from the floor. We walked to the stairs together, leaving Brad standing in the wreckage of his own tantrum. I unlocked the door. Sheriff Miller was standing in my kitchen. He was a big man with a face carved from granite, and he had known me for 20 years. Behind him stood 2 deputies. And behind them, standing by the front door, was Alana Vance, my lawyer, looking sharp and deadly in her black suit. "Mr. King," Sheriff Miller said, nodding to me respectfully, "we received a court order regarding an emergency protection situation, and we have a writ of execution for an eviction." Brad pushed past me, rushing into the kitchen. He tried to puff out his chest, trying to regain some semblance of control. "This is a misunderstanding," Sheriff Brad stammered. "My father is confused. We had a domestic dispute, but it is resolved. You can't be here. This is private property. This is my house." Sheriff Miller did not even blink. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Brad. "This is not your house, son," the sheriff said, his voice dry and flat. Brad snatched the paper. I watched his eyes scan the document. Confusion clouded his face. "What is this?" he asked. "The Freeman Foundation." "Who is the Freeman Foundation?" "This deed says the owner is the Freeman Foundation." "That is correct," Alana spoke up, stepping forward. Her heels clicked on the linoleum like the ticking of a countdown clock. "This property was placed into a blind trust 10 years ago under the name the Freeman Foundation. You are not the owner, Brad. You aren't even on the lease. In fact, there is no lease. You are a guest who has overstayed his welcome by 3 months and has caused significant damage to the property." Brad looked from the paper to Alana and then to me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. But Dad lives here. It is his house. He paid for it." "It is an asset of the foundation," Alana corrected him smoothly. "And the foundation has a very strict policy regarding tenants who assault the chairman of the board." Brad looked around wildly. "What chairman? What are you talking about?" I stepped forward. I released Zola's hand gently and smoothed down the front of my wrinkled shirt. I walked to the center of the kitchen. I did not look like a confused old man anymore. I stood tall. "I am the chairman," I said. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Brad stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. "You," he whispered. "You are the foundation." "Freeman," I said softly. "Free man." It was the name I chose when I paid off the mortgage. I put the house in a trust so that no matter what happened to me, nobody could take it away. Not the banks, not the government, and certainly not a greedy, ungrateful son. I pointed to the door, the same finger I had used to point him toward his first day of school, the same finger I had used to show him how to hold a baseball bat. Now it was pointing him toward oblivion. "The Freeman Foundation has voted, Brad." I said, "Your tenancy is terminated, effective immediately. You have 5 minutes to gather your personal effects. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and donated to charity." Brad began to shake. It wasn't the shaking of rage this time. It was the shaking of total collapse. But where will I go? I have no money. You froze the accounts. That sounds like a tenant problem, not a landlord problem, I said. He turned to Jessica, who was standing by the sink clutching a dish towel, her face gray with shock. "Jessica, do something," he pleaded. "Talk to him." Jessica looked at Brad. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at the eviction notice. Then she dropped the towel. She didn't look at me. She walked straight past Brad, out the back door and toward her car. She was a survivor, and she knew a sinking ship when she saw one. Brad watched her go. He looked back at me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please. You can't do this. I am your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had plotted to drug me, the man who had terrified my granddaughter, the man who had looked at my life's work and saw only a payday. "My son died in a car accident 3 weeks ago," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I don't know who you are, but you are trespassing." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "You heard the man. 5 minutes, or you leave in handcuffs." Brad scrambled. He ran to the living room, grabbing his laptop, his phone, his car keys. He didn't pack clothes. He didn't pack photos. He grabbed the tools of his greed. He ran out the front door, stumbling down the steps, his expensive sweater caught on a rose bush, tearing at the sleeve. I stood in the doorway and watched him get into his car. He fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life. He peeled out of the driveway, leaving a black skid mark on the pavement. He didn't look back. I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down. Zola was standing there, watching her father drive away. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked up at me. "Is he coming back, Grandpa?" she asked. "No, baby," I said, squeezing her hand. "The bad man is gone." Alana walked up beside me. She handed me a file. "The restraining order is active, Wallace, and the custody petition for Zola is filed. We have the temporary order based on the video evidence of child endangerment in the basement. She stays with you." I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and autumn leaves, but underneath that it smelled of something else. It smelled of freedom. I looked at the sheriff. "Thank you, Miller." Sheriff Miller tipped his hat. "Anytime, Wallace. Anytime." I turned back to the house. It was messy. There were holes in the walls from Brad's tantrum. The furniture was overturned. The air still smelled of the lies they had told. But as I walked back inside holding my granddaughter's hand, I knew it could be cleaned. Walls can be patched, furniture can be replaced. But dignity once lost is hard to regain. And today I had reclaimed mine in full. I walked to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I dialed the number for the cleaning service. Then I dialed the number for the locksmith. And then I dialed the number for the pizza place Zola liked. Grandpa Zola asked, pulling out a chair. "Are we rich?" I looked at her. I looked at the empty house that was finally mine again. I looked at the brave little girl who had helped me take down a giant. "Yes, Zola," I said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "We are rich. But not because of the money. We are rich because we know the truth. And the truth has set us free." The eviction was moving faster than a freight train off the tracks. Sheriff Miller was not a man who wasted time, and his deputies were efficiently clearing the path for the removal of the trespassers. Brad was still scrambling near the front door, trying to shove his expensive gaming laptop into a bag that was already overflowing with clothes he had grabbed in a panic. He looked pathetic. He looked like a rat trying to carry a piece of cheese out of a burning building while ignoring the other rats he had trampled to get it. But Jessica was the one who drew my attention. She was moving with a frantic energy that bordered on hysteria. She had bypassed the clothes and the electronics. She was clutching a jewelry box, the one she had filled with pieces she bought using my credit card over the last 3 months. She rushed toward the door, her high heels clicking rapidly on the hardwood floor. But in her haste, she forgot about the mess they had created just hours before. She forgot about the puddle of herbal tea she had spilled when she was nervously preparing to drug me. She forgot about the shattered remnants of the vase Brad had thrown in his rage. Her heel caught the edge of the wet rug. It happened in slow motion, the way accidents always do when you have spent a lifetime watching heavy machinery operate. Her ankle turned, her balance shifted. She flailed her arms, sending the jewelry box flying through the air. Gold chains and diamond earrings scattered across the floor like confetti. Jessica went down hard. She did not land on her hands to break her fall. She twisted her body in midair, a desperate, unnatural contortion to protect her stomach. She landed on her side with a sickening thud that shook the floorboards. A scream tore from her throat. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of primal terror. "My baby!" she shrieked, clutching her belly with both hands. "Brad, help me save the baby." The room went dead silent. The deputies stopped moving. Brad dropped his bag and spun around, his face draining of color. He rushed to her side, falling to his knees and sliding across the floor to get to her. He did not ask if she was okay. He did not look at her ankle, which was clearly swelling. He put his hands on her stomach, his eyes wide with panic. "Is it okay?" he gasped. "Is the baby okay?" "Jessica, talk to me. We need that baby." I stood by the kitchen island holding Zola's hand. I felt her small fingers stiffen in mine. She went rigid. She was looking at her father and the woman she called her stepmother. She was 12 years old, but she was smart. She knew what that scream meant. She knew what those hands on the stomach meant. Zola had been an only child. Her mother had left when she was 2, and Brad had raised her, or rather dragged her along on his various schemes. He had always told her it was just the two of them against the world. He had told her that Jessica was just a friend, just a helper. Even when they moved in together, he had downplayed the relationship, telling Zola that Jessica was there to help take care of Grandpa. But now the truth was sprawling on the floor. "You are pregnant," Zola whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but in the silence it sounded like a thunderclap. Jessica looked up. Her face was twisted in pain, but her eyes were cold. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to comfort the child standing 10 feet away. She just glared. "Yes, I am pregnant," she hissed. "And if I lose this baby because of your crazy grandfather, I will sue you all into oblivion. Brad, get me up. Get me to a doctor. This is the only heir that matters now." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. The only heir that matters. Brad didn't correct her. He didn't tell her not to speak to his daughter that way. He was too busy fussing over Jessica, helping her stand up, treating her like a precious glass vessel, while Zola stood there looking like she had been slapped. Zola looked at me. Looked. Her eyes were swimming with tears. "Grandpa," she said, her voice breaking, Daddy said he wasn't going to have any more kids. He said he couldn't afford them. He said that is why I couldn't go to dance camp. He said we were broke." I looked at Brad. He was avoiding Zola's gaze, focusing entirely on Jessica. The cowardice was radiating off him in waves. He had lied to his daughter to save money. He had denied her a childhood to fund a new life with a new woman and a new baby. He was replacing her. He was clearing out the old inventory to make room for the new stock. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. It wasn't the rage of a victim anymore. It was the judgment of a patriarch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I still had the recordings. I had hours of audio from the hidden devices I had planted days ago. There was one specific conversation I had heard just last night while I was locked in the basement. I had hoped I wouldn't have to use it. I had hoped to spare Zola the final cruelty. But looking at Brad's back, looking at how easily he ignored his firstborn, I knew I had to burn the bridge. I had to burn it so thoroughly that Zola would never be tempted to cross it back to him again. I scrolled through the files. I found the one marked bedroom, 11 p.m. I turned the volume up to maximum. "You want to know the truth, Zola?" I asked, my voice steady and hard. "You want to know what your father really plans for you?" Brad froze. He turned around, his eyes widening in horror. "Dad, don't," he warned. I pressed play. The sound of Brad's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "We can't keep her, Jessica. Not with a newborn coming. The apartment we are looking at in Florida is adults only. Besides, she is getting too old. She asks too many questions. Once we get the old man's money and put him in the home, we will have enough to pay off the child support arrears. Then I can sign over custody to the state or find some boarding school that takes charity cases. I am tired of her dragging me down. I want a fresh start. Just you, me, and the baby." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Zola made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a cry. It was a gasp, a sharp intake of breath as if she had been punched in the gut. She stepped back, shaking her head violently. "No," she whimpered. "No, Daddy didn't say that. That is not true." Brad stood up. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He looked at me with pure hatred. "You illegal wiretapping old fossil," he shouted. "You had no right to record that. That was private. He admitted it. He didn't even try to lie to her. He was more angry about being caught than he was about breaking his daughter's heart. Zola looked at him. The shock in her eyes was replaced by something else. Fury. The pure, unadulterated fury of a child who realizes her hero is a villain. She let out a scream, a primal roar of betrayal. She lunged. She didn't run to him for a hug. She ran at him with her fists flying. She was small, but she was propelled by a lifetime of disappointment. She slammed into Brad's legs, pummeling his thighs, his stomach anywhere she could reach. "You liar," she screamed, hitting him over and over. "You hate me. You wanted to get rid of me. I hate you. I hate you." Brad stumbled back. He was a grown man being attacked by a 12-year-old girl. Any real father would have grabbed her hands and hugged her. Any real father would have taken the blows and apologized. But Brad was not a father. He was a narcissist who had just lost his fortune, his reputation, and his control. He reacted on instinct, the instinct of a bully. "Get off me, you little brat," he shouted. He raised his hand, and he swung. It wasn't a push, it was a backhand slap. Hard. The sound of his hand connecting with Zola's face echoed through the house, louder than the eviction notice, louder than the recording, louder than anything. Zola went flying back. She hit the floor, sliding across the wood until she bumped into the wall. She lay there stunned, holding her cheek, staring at him in disbelief. For a second, Brad looked at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. But that second was all he got. Sheriff Miller moved faster than I had ever seen a man of his size move. He didn't shout a warning. He didn't reach for his taser. He launched himself across the room like a linebacker. He tackled Brad, driving him into the floor with a bone-jarring crunch. Brad's face hit the hardwood. Miller's knee drove into his back. "You are under arrest," Miller growled, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Assault on a minor. Assault in the presence of an officer. You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it before I forget I am wearing a badge." The two deputies were on him in an instant. They yanked Brad's arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Jessica screamed again from the floor, but nobody looked at her. I ran to Zola. I fell to my knees beside her. I pulled her into my arms, burying her face in my chest so she wouldn't have to see her father being dragged away like a criminal. She was shaking violently, sobbing into my shirt. "I got you, baby," I whispered, rocking her back and forth. "I got you. He can never hurt you again." Brad was screaming as they hauled him up. "Dad, tell them it was self-defense. She attacked me. Dad, help me." I looked up. I looked at the son I had raised. The son I had forgiven 1,000 times. The son I had bailed out of debt. The son I had loved. I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't have a son," I said. My voice was ice cold. "My son died a long time ago. You are just a stranger who broke into my house." Sheriff Miller shoved him toward the door. "Get him out of here," Miller barked. They dragged him out, kicking and screaming. Jessica was helped up by a deputy, limping and crying not for her husband, but for herself. She followed them out, leaving a trail of broken jewelry and broken promises behind her. The door slammed shut. The house was quiet. The only sound was Zola's weeping. I held her tight, feeling the weight of the last few weeks lift off my shoulders. It was over. The tumor had been cut out. The wound would leave a scar, yes, but wounds heal. Cancer kills. And today we had chosen life. I looked around the room. It was messy. It was chaotic. But for the first time in months, it felt clean. I kissed the top of Zola's head. "We are going to be okay," I told her. And this time I knew it wasn't a lie. This time it was a promise I intended to keep with every breath I had left. Dưới đây là nội dung chi tiết cho fan 13 trong trại giam được viết bằng tiếng Anh theo phong cách minh đàn ông đèn tối ưu hóa cho AI Voice đọc diễn cảm không có tiêu đề và ký tự đặc biệt đảm bảo độ dài và kịch tính. The visiting room of the county jail smelled of bleach and desperation, a scent that sticks to the back of your throat and refuses to leave. I sat on a metal stool that was bolted to the floor, staring at my reflection in the thick plexiglass divider. The man looking back at me was not the same man who had entered the hospital weeks ago. That man had been a father blinded by love. This man was a survivor hardened by betrayal. I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt and waited. I was not here to offer comfort. I was here to deliver the final receipt for a transaction that had cost me my heart. The heavy steel door on the other side buzzed and clanked open. A guard led a prisoner into the room. It took me a moment to recognize him. Brad was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big for him. His hair, which he usually styled with expensive gel, was greasy and matted against his forehead. His face was gray, covered in a patchy stubble that showed he hadn't slept or shaved in days. He walked with a shuffle, the swagger of the successful businessman completely gone, replaced by the terrified gait of a man who knows he is at the bottom of the food chain. He saw me and his eyes lit up with a pathetic, frantic hope. He rushed to the stool and grabbed the phone receiver. I picked up mine slowly. "Dad," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you came. You have to get me out of here. You have to post bail." "It is a mistake, Dad. A huge mistake. The lawyer says if you drop the charges and post the bond, I can come home today." I looked at him. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes. I looked at the way his hands were shaking. He was not sorry. He was just uncomfortable. He was experiencing consequences for the first time in his life, and he was allergic to them. "I am not dropping the charges, Brad," I said, my voice flat and calm. "And I am not posting bail. The judge set it at $100,000 cash. I have the money. It is sitting in my account right now. But I would rather burn it in the parking lot than use a single penny to buy your freedom." Brad's face crumbled. He tried to lean closer to the glass as if he could force his will through the barrier. "Dad, please listen to me. It wasn't my fault. It was Jessica. She made me do it. She said we needed the money for the baby. She said you were sick. She manipulated me, Dad. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You can't leave me in here. These people, they are animals. I am scared, Dad. I am so scared." He started to cry. It was an ugly, sobbing display. He slid off the stool and fell to his knees on the dirty concrete floor. He pressed his forehead against the metal shelf beneath the window. "Dad, please. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. Just get me out. I will work for you. I will pay you back every cent. Just don't leave me here." I watched him kneel. I remembered the times I had knelt to tie his shoes. I remembered the times I had knelt to fix his bike. I had spent my life kneeling so he could stand tall. And this was how he repaid me. By kneeling only when he needed something. "Stand up," I commanded. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Dad." "Stand up," I repeated, sharper this time. "You look pathetic. You wanted to be a big man. You wanted to run the family. Big men don't kneel when they get caught. They take their punishment." Brad pulled himself up. The hope in his eyes was fading, replaced by a dawning horror. He realized that the ATM was closed. He realized that the old man he thought he could bully was gone. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. "I am your son." "Because you hurt Zola," I said. "You hit a child, you hit my granddaughter, and you planned to abandon her. I heard the tape, Brad. I heard you say she was a burden. That is not something a father says. That is something a monster says. And monsters belong in cages." Brad wiped his nose on his sleeve. He looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. "Dad, it is not just the jail. It is the people outside. Before all this, I borrowed money. A lot of money. From some bad people. They know I am in here. They know I can't pay. If I stay in here, I can't work. I can't pay them. They will kill me, Dad. You have to help me. It is $50,000. That is all." I leaned forward. The ghost of a smile touched my lips. "I know," I said. Brad blinked. "You know I know about the gambling debts," I said. "I know about the failed crypto investments. I know about the loan shark named Vinny who operates out of the back of the auto body shop on 5th Street. I know he threatened to break your legs last month. That is why you were so desperate to sell my house. You weren't trying to build a future. You were trying to save your own skin." Brad nodded vigorously, hope flickering again. Yes, exactly. "So you understand. You have to pay him. Or get me out so I can pay him. Otherwise, I am dead." I took a deep breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I pressed it against the glass. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Brad squinted. It was a promissory note. His eyes widened as he recognized his own signature. That is my debt note," he stammered. "How did you get that? Did Vinny give it to you?" "I bought it," I said simply. Brad stared at me. "You what?" "I bought your debt," I said. "I went to see Vinny yesterday. I told him I was the chairman of the Freeman Foundation. I told him you were a liability. I offered him 20 cents on the dollar to buy the debt and walk away. He took the cash and gave me the paper. He was happy to get rid of you. Brad's mouth fell open. So I don't owe him any more. I owe you. That is correct, I said, folding the paper and putting it back in my pocket. You owe me $50,000 plus interest. Brad let out a hysterical laugh. He slumped against the glass relief washing over him. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Dad, you scared me. Okay, so I owe you. We can work out a payment plan when I get out. You won't hurt me. You are my dad. I looked at him with pity. You still don't get it, do you? I am not your dad right now, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated through the phone line. I am your creditor, and I have reviewed your file. You are a high-risk borrower. You have no assets. You have no job. You have no character. What are you saying? Brad whispered, the fear returning tenfold. I am saying that I am not interested in a payment plan, I said. I am writing off the debt. Brad looked confused. You are forgiving it. No, I said. I am holding it. As long as you are in this jail, I know exactly where my investment is. I know you aren't out there hurting my granddaughter. I know you aren't out there scamming old women. I paid $50,000 to keep you in here, Brad. I didn't pay to get you out. I paid to ensure that when the judge asks for a character reference, I can stand up and say that as your primary creditor, I believe you are a flight risk and should be denied bond permanently. Brad recoiled as if I had slapped him. You bought my debt to keep me in jail. I bought your debt to buy my peace of mind, I corrected him. And it was a bargain. Brad's face turned red. A vein bulged in his neck. Who are you? He screamed. You are not a warehouse worker. Warehouse workers don't have foundation money. They don't buy debts from mobsters. Who are you really? I stood up. I hung the phone up on the hook. I looked at him through the glass. I am the man you underestimated, I said. But since you asked, do you remember the stories about the silent partner who funded the community center? The one nobody ever saw. The one they called the architect. Brad's eyes went wide. The architect was a local legend, a businessman who owned half the real estate in the district but operated through shell companies. Brad had idolized him. Brad had talked about him for years. No, Brad whispered. No, that is impossible. You drive a Ford truck. You wear flannel shirts. I wear what I want, I said. Because I don't need to impress anyone. I built an empire quietly while you were busy being loud and broke. I was going to leave it all to you, Brad. All of it. The buildings, the foundation, the legacy. I was waiting for you to grow up. I was waiting for you to show me 1 ounce of integrity. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging the glass. But you failed the test. You failed it when you tried to steal a house that you were going to inherit anyway. You failed it when you chose greed over family. Brad began to scream. He slammed his fists against the glass. No, you can't do this. Give it to me. It is mine. I am your son. Give me the money. Guards rushed in. They grabbed Brad by the arms. He struggled, kicking and screaming, his face twisted into a mask of pure avarice. I am the heir, he shrieked. I am the heir. Tell him let me go. I will be good. Dad, please. I will be good. I watched them drag him away. I watched the heavy steel door slam shut, silencing his screams. I stood there for a moment in the silence. I felt a deep sadness but no regret. I had lost a son, but I had saved a family. I had saved Zola. And I had saved myself. I turned and walked out of the visiting room. I walked through the security checkpoints. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. I took out my phone and dialed Alana. It is done, I said. He knows. Set up the trust fund for Zola. And Alana put the house in her name. I am just the caretaker from now on. I got into my truck. I started the engine. I had a dinner date with a 12-year-old girl and a pizza. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking ahead. The road was clear. And I was finally driving my own life again. The seasons in Chicago change with a violence that mirrors the city itself. 6 months had passed since the day the sheriff dragged my son out of my house in handcuffs. Summer had bled into a gray autumn, and now winter had clamped its iron jaws around the neighborhood. The snow was piled high in dirty mounds along the curbs, and the wind coming off the lake was sharp enough to cut glass. I sat in my truck with the engine idling, watching the heat distort the air above the vents. I was waiting for the automatic gate of the community center to open. I had spent the last half year rebuilding. Not just the foundation of the buildings I owned, but the foundation of my own life. I had turned the basement where they tried to imprison me into a state-of-the-art media room for my granddaughter Zola. I had hired a tutor to help her catch up on the schoolwork she missed while her father was dragging her through his scams. We were healing, slowly, quietly. But the past has a way of showing up uninvited. I saw a figure standing by the gate. At first I thought it was just a homeless woman seeking shelter from the biting wind. She was wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather and a wool hat pulled low over her ears. She was shivering violently, stamping her boots in the slush to keep the circulation going in her toes. But it was the bundle in her arms that made me stop. She was clutching a baby wrapped in a thick blue blanket, shielding the infant from the wind with her own body. I rolled the truck forward. The woman looked up. It was Jessica. The last time I saw her, she was screaming about her jewelry and her rights. She had been the picture of arrogant entitlement. Now she looked like a ghost. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones protruding sharply against pale skin. The expensive makeup was gone, replaced by dark circles of exhaustion. She looked 10 years older. She looked broken. I lowered the window halfway. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of exhaust and impending snow. "Jessica," I said. My voice was not angry, it was just tired. She rushed to the window, her eyes filled with tears instantly. "Wallace," she sobbed. "Oh, thank God. I have been waiting here for 2 hours. I didn't want to ring the bell. I didn't want to wake Zola." She shifted the bundle in her arms. "Look, Wallace. Look at him. This is Leo. He is your grandson." She pulled back the blanket. A small sleeping face peered out, oblivious to the cold and the desperation of his mother. He looked like Brad. The resemblance was undeniable. I looked at the baby. I felt a tug in my chest, the ancient biological pull of blood. But then I looked at Jessica. I remembered the tea she had poisoned. I remembered the safe she had cracked. I remembered how she had stepped over Zola to save her jewelry. "What do you want, Jessica?" I asked. She leaned against the door of the truck. "Wallace, please. I have nowhere to go. The apartment, I couldn't pay the rent. They evicted me yesterday. Brad is in jail. You are the only family we have left. Please, just let us stay in the basement. I will cook. I will clean. I won't ask for money. I just need a roof for Leo. It is freezing out here. You can't let your grandson freeze." She was doing it again. She was using a child as a human shield. She was using an innocent life to leverage her way back into a position of comfort. She hadn't changed. She had just become more desperate. I opened the door and stepped out of the truck. I towered over her. The wind whipped my coat around my legs, but I stood firm. "You aren't asking for a roof, Jessica," I said. "You are asking for a host. You want to attach yourself back to me because your first host is in a cage." "That is not true," she cried. "I am sorry, Wallace. I am so sorry for everything. I was scared. Brad made me do it. Stop," I commanded. My voice cut through her sobbing. "Stop blaming him. He is a bad man, yes. But you held the spoon, you poured the powder, you watched me stumble and slur my words, and you smiled. You aren't a victim, Jessica. You are an accomplice who ran out of luck." I looked at the baby again. He stirred, letting out a small whimper. "He is innocent," I said softly. "But you are not. And if I let you into my house, I am teaching you that you can try to destroy a man and then sleep in his guest room when things get tough. I am teaching this boy that manipulation is a survival strategy." I reached into my inside pocket. I pulled out a white envelope. I had carried it with me for weeks, knowing this day would come. I knew she would run out of money. I knew she would come crawling back. I handed her the envelope. "Take this," I said. She grabbed it, tearing it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a cashier's check. It wasn't a fortune. It was $5,000. Enough for a deposit on a small apartment and a few months of rent in a working-class neighborhood. Enough for food and diapers. But not enough for luxury, not enough for a lifetime. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the check. "This is a start," I said, "and it is a goodbye." "Wallace, please," she begged, clutching my sleeve. "This won't last forever. What do I do when it runs out?" "You work," I said simply. "You get a job, you wait tables, you scrub floors, you do what I did for 40 years. You do what millions of single mothers do every day without trying to poison their fathers-in-law. You stand up, Jessica." She looked at me, shocked by the coldness of my logic. "You are throwing us away," she whispered. "No," I said. "I am cutting the cord. I raised a son who thought the world owed him everything, and look where he is. I won't make that mistake with you. And I won't let you make that mistake with Leo. I pointed down the street toward the bus stop. There is a motel 3 miles down the road, I said. They have weekly rates. It is warm. It is clean. Go there. Use the money to get on your feet. But do not come back to my house. Do not call me. If you show up here again, I will file for a restraining order, and I will petition the state for custody of that boy on the grounds that you are homeless and unstable. Do you understand me? She stared at me, her mouth open. She saw the resolve in my eyes. She saw the architect looking back at her. She nodded slowly. She tucked the check into her coat. She pulled the blanket tighter around Leo. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first honest thing she had said to me in years. She turned and walked away. I watched her go. I watched her trudging through the snow, her head bowed against the wind. I felt a heavy sadness settling in my gut. It is a terrible thing to close your heart to family, but sometimes a closed door is the only thing that keeps the house from burning down. I got back in my truck. I didn't look back. I put the gear in drive and headed for the highway. I had one more stop to make. A stop that would mark the end of this long, dark chapter. An hour later, I pulled onto the tarmac of a private airfield on the outskirts of the city. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting a brilliant gold light on the sleek white jet waiting on the runway. Standing by the stairs was Alana Vance. She was wearing a heavy wool coat and holding a leather portfolio. Beside her stood Zola. My granddaughter looked like a different child than the scared girl in the basement. She was wearing a new pink parka and holding a travel backpack. Her cheeks were rosy and her smile was bright. I parked the truck and walked toward them. The wind here was strong, but it felt fresh. It felt like adventure. Alana smiled as I approached. "Everything is signed, Wallace," she said, handing me the portfolio. "The trust is locked. The house is secure. And the restraining orders are permanent. You are legally untouchable." I took the portfolio. I felt the weight of the paperwork inside. The weight of the battles fought and won. "Thank you, Alana," I said, shaking her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You did the hard part," she said. "You told the truth." I looked down at Zola. "Are you ready, kiddo?" I asked. Zola beamed. She grabbed my hand. "Grandpa, are we really going to see the ocean?" I laughed. A deep rumbling laugh that felt good in my chest. "Yes, we are. We are going to see the ocean. We are going to eat shrimp until we explode. And we are going to forget about snow for a month." We walked up the stairs of the jet. I paused at the top and looked back at the city skyline in the distance. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, my son was sitting in a cell facing the consequences of his greed. Somewhere on a snowy street, his wife was learning the hard lesson of survival. I did not wish them harm, but I no longer carried their burden. I had spent my life building walls to protect them, but in the end I had to tear those walls down to save myself. I looked at Zola settling into the leather seat by the window, her nose pressed against the glass in wonder. She was the future. She was the second chance I didn't think I would get. I sat down and buckled my seatbelt. The pilot's voice came over the intercom announcing our departure. The engines roared to life, a powerful hum that vibrated through the floor. As the plane accelerated down the runway, I closed my eyes. I thought about Etta May, who I had moved into a beautiful assisted living facility with a garden view. I thought about the warehouse where I had learned the value of honest work. And I thought about the man I used to be, the man who was afraid to speak up. That man was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone who knew that love is not about blind loyalty, but about truth. The wheels lifted off the ground. The gravity pushed me back into my seat. We climbed higher and higher, breaking through the gray cloud cover into the blinding blue sky above. I looked out the window at the sea of clouds below. The world looked peaceful from up here. I reached over and took Zola's hand. She squeezed back. "We are flying, Grandpa," she whispered. "Yes, we are, Zola," I said. "We are flying, and we are never looking down again." I leaned back, and for the first time in a long time I closed my eyes and slept without fear. The architect had finished his renovation. The old structure was gone, and the new house was built on rock. I learned that family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins, but by who is willing to bleed for you. For years I thought loving my son meant fixing his mistakes, but I realized that true love sometimes means letting people face their own consequences. Cutting ties with Brad was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was the only way to save Zola from becoming collateral damage in his war of greed. We cannot choose our relatives, but we can choose our dignity. I chose to live the rest of my life in truth rather than dying in a lie. If you enjoyed this story of justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments below. Would you have given Brad a second chance, or did he get exactly what he deserved? I read every comment. See you in the next story.